Andy.
Okay. If we're ready, then I will call the June 18th, 2018 Select Board meeting to order and invite you to rise and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I'd like to welcome everyone to tonight's Select Board meeting and remind you, if you hadn't already, please do sign in. I think I've seen every one of you do it, so thank you. And if you have a cell phone with you, if you could put it to silence, that would be greatly appreciated. Thank you very much. Okay, so we're going to go on to agenda additions and changes, and there's a couple things here I see. Greg?
First thing is a tutorial of how to set your profile for anonymous posting on PlaySpeak, and that is to go with the firearms discussion item, 5E.
Okay.
And it looks like we have some brochures on annual report and steps to end domestic violence. I believe that's from Steps VT.
Who is here?
And that would be probably public to be
Public
heard.
to be heard, yes.
Okay. And then, is this the instructions, or?
Yeah, that was also an email sent out about PlaySpeak. We'll be getting to it later on in the evening, but there is a component of PlaySpeak that is a geolocator that limits your ability to post from outside the Essex area. So we'll get into that a little later.
Okay, is that all? Okay. So, do I have a motion to amend the agenda to add the information on Place Speak and the information from Steps BT on our agenda?
So moved.
Thank you, Mike. Andy, you look confused.
I'm going to ask a question after we can get through the motion.
I'll second it.
Okay, thank you, Irene. Any further discussion? Andy?
Yes, if we put the step stuff on the agenda, does it make it difficult for them to talk about things that are not on the agenda?
Oh, that's the good point. Yeah. Okay. Right.
So I don't think we need-
Yeah, I don't think you need to put it on the
Steps-
agenda. They're here from citizens wishing to address the board.
Okay. So, Mike, you okay if we take that off, that motion, the steps thing, because
Sure.
it's public to be heard? Irene, you good?
I'm okay with that.
Okay, Sam, you got that? Okay. Thank you, Andy. Appreciate that. Okay, any further discussion on amending the agenda to add the Place Speak information to 5E? Okay, hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, motion passes 5-0. Thank you all. Next item is public to be heard. This is a time for the public to speak to the select board on topics that are not on the agenda. Is there anyone here tonight wishing to speak during public to be heard? Okay, I'm going to go to Gail first. Yes. You can get to the mic if you'd like, if it's a long one. We don't usually do that. We usually have them do it by the seat.
Okay, so my name is Gail Beck, and I am an Essex Town resident, and I'm here on behalf of Steps to End Domestic Violence. I'm on the board of directors there, and I'm here. As I'm here, we also have we're also addressing the city of Burlington tonight at the same time. Both Burlington and Essex Town and Essex Junction are our biggest service users. Last year, we approximately 183 people we served claimed Essex as their hometown. Not everybody wants to identify where they come from in our agency. So we're reaching out to the towns that we serve the most for some additional funding. The reason is that in the past, we've always been funded by the United Way, and they fund us in 3-year cycles. For this next 3-year cycle, 2019, 20, and 21, we asked for $120,000 a year. We were funded 0. So we've had to make some dramatic and drastic cuts, and we've kind of look at this as a wake-up call. We want to get our message out and let everybody know what's going on, that we are going to have to make a lot of cuts. We're eliminating 4 positions. We're going to be cutting back on the shelter. Things like snacks for children's playgroups we don't have money for, extra food for the shelter. We've had to take off a shelter manager for the weekends. We're just making drastic cuts. We're also, as a board, doing strategic planning, so we're not in this position moving forward. We're also just from a safety standpoint, we don't want to stop our education and our outreach to the community. And we're really doing a lot of fundraising, looking for donors, really changing our whole mode of operandi type. But we're reaching out to Essex. We're very grateful for the money you've given us in the past, the donation. I think it's been about $4,500. Greatly appreciated, greatly needed. We're asking for a one-time additional $1,000 for the 2018-2019 our budget, so that it could take a little bit of pressure off, and maybe with that money we can do a little bit more. And just so you know, almost 80% of every dollar that we get goes directly back into services. our staff, we're not doing any staff raises, we're not increasing medical, our medical costs have increased, we're not increasing that. I mean, we're trying to keep everything balanced. But, and people say, well, what's $1,000? $1,000 is a lot of money to us. And we just hope that maybe Essex will step up and help us in this time of crisis. And we will continue to serve the Essex population, both the junction and the town. And thank you, I guess, is what I want to say.
Well,
Thank you for listening.
Gail, thank you for coming in, and we're sorry to hear that, that your budget was cut by that much. That's about 10% of your?
It is about 10%.
Timing is not ideal, because we just wrapped up that portion. The good people of Essex have said they want 1% of the budget to go out to human service groups such as yours.
Mm-hmm.
And we just went through that process, and we weren't able to fully fund all of them that requested. So there's no funds left over from that particular budget this time. But what's the board?
Well, this is not on the
that's
agenda,
true.
so if you want this on the next agenda, we certainly can do that. You should have some direction to staff as to what you may want on the agenda and what type of information you need. If you're of a mind to actually put this on the next agenda.
Because if we do rearrange that budget that we just approved for that 1%, then somebody's gonna go without. I mean, it's gonna get reduced. Elaine?
I would like to request that we do put this on the agenda, and I would like to request conversation about other sources of funding for a request of $1,000. I'm fairly certain that could be found, as long as the rest of the board was willing to do that. I consider this a public safety issue in a similar way that we look at our EMTs, so.
What about the other groups that are impacted in a similar way but haven't shown up here? I mean, that's something we might want to know, is how many of those are potentially.
I would say that it wouldn't surprise me if other groups came back. From what I understand, the United Way situation primarily affected Burlington entities. And so if other groups come back to us because the United Way cut their funding, I would want to be sure that they served Essex. I don't know that anybody else that receives United Way funding serves Essex. We're putting a lot of time and effort into other safety issues. This is equally important.
So everyone good, we'll put that on a future agenda, and sounds like sooner the better. Andy?
Just a clarification, is this is the last meeting of the current fiscal year. If we move into July, the July meeting, we're in FYE 19, right? So are we talking $18 or $19, I guess would be the question. I think we, right. So I'm assuming that once we're past June 30th, we're either talking fund balance or New Year dollars, right? So that just to make sure that I'm understanding that right.
One of the other, or, yeah, and something from the 18-19 budget.
And can I continue? I think in the last meeting, we talked about finding $1,500 for the Essex Community Historical Society, and I think this is a much more important public safety issue. I agree it's a public safety issue. It's a larger public safety issue than our gun ordinance we're spending a lot of time and money on as well. So I'm very much in favor of fully funding this. I know we can have the discussion later. Regarding other entities that may be impacted, I'm sure there are. I know there are other entities. I know that the director of the Chittenden Emergency Food Shelf has said that they're fine, that they're okay with the cuts. They're gonna assess what they can do, what changes they need to make to live through that. Also, they have, if you look at their annual report, they have a lot more cash buffer than this organization does, as does COTS. They also have a much larger asset base and investments that they can draw on to weather a shortfall in funding. I think, again, better than this organization can.
So again, it sounds like we're gonna need to review this at the next.
Well, you have a request to put it on the agenda. I don't know if you got it, you think you got a second?
Yeah, I think any one of us could ask for it to be on the agenda without approval from the whole board, so.
So we'll
let's-
put it on the next,
Did you want to say something, Mike?
I was just going to, Evan said something about some direction for staff between now and when this meeting is going to be. And all I was going to say is, Andy took the words out of my mouth. We're at the end of this fiscal year. It would seem to me that, if we looked hard enough, we might be able to scrape together a grant from 2018 funds to make this happen.
We'll have to put it on a future agenda to have the full discussion.
That was my only thought.
Okay.
I'll be
Yep.
happy to sit down with finance to do some things. I think one of the things we'd also like to find out in the 2 weeks is what agencies were not funded or reduced by
United Way.
United Way. Thank you. I had a little cramp there. By United Way, because again, concerned that there's more than one. We know there's
Yeah, I'd
more
like
than
to
one
know- I'd
out
like to know
there.
what's
What
lurking.
is the impact? And if we go and do a process where we're thinking we're talking about $1,000, and in the next 2 months we're actually talking about a lot more than that, we're gonna not want to we're gonna want to know what we have available for it.
Okay. Thank you, Gail.
Thank you very much. I just want to say that, we do serve directly Essex Town and Junction. So we are serving the town.
Yeah, and there's no question about the good work that you do.
Thank
It's just
you.
about where the money would come from.
I hear you. Don't I know?
Thank you,
Thank
Gail.
you.
Is there anyone else wishing to speak to in public to be heard?
I think the gentleman.
The
Dan?
gentleman in red.
Shirt.
Did you have your hand up before? Yes, I did. Okay. Yes, now would be a good time. Remember, this is things not on the agenda. Okay?
This is entirely about the forest management plan for Indian Brook Park.
Okay, so that's.
That's on the
That's,
agenda.
that's on the agenda, so this would not be the time.
Okay,
This is-
I didn't see it on the agenda, so,
It's 5C, the Indian Brook Forest Management Plan.
the adoption of it. Okay, you're right.
Okay?
Sorry.
So we'll be sure to recognize you at that time.
That's fine.
Okay. Anyone else for public to be heard? For items not on the agenda? Okay, then, thank you all. We're going to move on to our first business item, 5A, and that's reappointments to boards, committees, and commissions. What we do as a practice here is anytime there's a member of a board, committee, or commission that's up for reappointment, we invite them in to talk to the select board to let us know what's on their mind, how things are going, what things you think we should know about that perhaps we haven't heard about. So what I'd like to do is invite Christine and Dan together up to the table to talk about the Conservation and Trails Committee. You're both up for reappointment, and we'd like to hear from both of you on your opinions on how things are going and what things you think we should know about that perhaps we don't. So who would like to go first?
Okay. Mostly, things are going very well. The notable exception, in my opinion, is something I've been asked to keep as my personal opinion, rather than as Trails Conservation Committee member. The item is the Forest Management Plan, and I regard it as a potentially immense mistake. And I will speak to that more when my turn comes on that item. Otherwise, oh, by the way, I'm very pleased that the committees decided to merge. It relieves me of the having to choose between one and the other.
The conservation and the trails?
Right.
Good. Good, I'm glad that worked out.
That's a major strong point. Thank you.
Thank you. Christine?
Christine Hammer. It's hard to believe that it's been 3 years now. But I've been very gratified to see that the committee has gotten more involved in more things, and that we have instituted certain kinds of events and all to try to reach out to the public about issues regarding conservation and some of the jewels that we have in the town for people to use and enjoy. So I've been really happy that it's been a very kind of hands-on. It's not just an honorarium, and have really enjoyed getting deeply involved. So I serve as vice chair, and it's really been a great experience.
Wonderful, that's great to hear. Thank you.
Can I say thank you very much for what you have done for the for Essex
Oh, thank
Parks and
you.
Recreation?
Thank you. Well, I lived in the town since 1978, and working, having a couple of businesses and having a full-time job and traveling for it, and not having a whole lot of time. Once I decided to work for myself, I thought, I've lived here for so long, it's about time that I get involved. So this was a great match.
What a
and,
wonderful way to get involved in it, yeah. Super. Thank you, Christine and Dan.
Thank you both for being willing to re-up again. We appreciate that very much. Thank you.
You'll have us.
Is there any other questions or comments for either? Elaine?
Being new here, I'm just curious, does the Conservation and Trails Committee also look at the tree population in the town in general, or is it just trails and forests?
No, a couple years ago, we did an urban tree survey, which I believe is also on the agenda tonight. And we, the members of the committee, as well as volunteers and university students, all went out with GPS systems and after some training to do a survey of the urban tree population in the town, in advance of what we knew was going to happen, and that was the appearance of the emerald ash borer, as well as anticipation of additional invasives. So yes, we have been trying to be stewards of that kind of whole issue.
Andy?
So does the village have their own similar group, and is there cross-pollination? Is it working? Are there any?
Yes and yes.
Okay, okay.
As actually, the Junction had done a survey well in advance of ours. So it was a perfect, kind of a perfect meshing. It was about time that we did ours, but there were things they learned, and it was very helpful. So yes, the Junction and now the town has been surveyed, at least with urban trees. We've got more trees to look at, and with the Indian Brook Forest Management Plan, there's also now been an assessment of the tree population also at that particular park.
Christine, that's the tree committee, though. Is it, did that work in the village? As opposed to a conservation and trails?
Oh, yeah, they had, maybe,
The village has the tree committee.
right,
And then they
right,
have the bike walk committee.
right.
So the bike walk takes care of trails. The tree committee is strictly street trees.
So there's certainly overlap. Okay, great. Anything
Work
else?
was still done, that was the bottom line. was the work
Okay.
was done.
Right. Anybody else? Okay, so, if
I just want
Go
to say,
ahead.
we would love to have any of you show up for our cleanup days. Irene has been a regular
at Indian Brook?
at Indian
You
Brook.
do that twice a year, right?
Twice a year,
When's the next one?
in September, the end of September. And the spring one is in April, generally coinciding around Earth Day. This past year was actually on Earth Day, but it's usually around Earth Day.
Just before Green Up Day.
Yes, yes. So every weekend you can be busy doing something.
Thank you. So if the board decides to go into executive session, we will then have a discussion about reappointments, exit, make a decision, then somebody from the manager's office will contact you tomorrow. But we do deeply appreciate all you do for our community by volunteering so many hours on behalf of the community. So thank you for that.
Thank you for all your support.
Our pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Next up, we have one reappointment to the Energy Committee, and that's David Gottlieb. I'll invite you to come on up, please. And also, we want to say thanks to you as well for volunteering. On the
Well, I want to
newly-
thank the board for electing me the first time.
To the newly energized Energy Committee, right?
Yeah, that's true, from what I gather. I'm new on the job, 1 year. We're new to the community, a little over 1 year. It's very nice to see a community that actually does something. Where I came from previously, there was a lot of words, a lot of money, but very little accomplished. But
So, yeah, why don't you tell us how things are going and what you think we should know about?
well, in the past year, the committee I was one of the last elected. It got pretty well organized and focused. And one of the questions is how do we use our time most effectively? And what really are we going to try to accomplish? And one of those, as previously mentioned by the other committee, is awareness, trying to get more public awareness of energy conservation and renewable energy. The parades, turns out that a lot of things came together this past year a little faster than was thought that was going to happen. One was Green Lantern program, which is a solar array over at Sand Hill area, and the ability to, with other communities, to share in that generation and not take the economic risk as much. And the other thing is promotion of, turns out that there's been a lot of articles lately that the auto industry is promoting electric cars, and in the next 5 or 6 years, you're going to find it hard to find a gas engine car on sale. I mean, that sounds a little ridiculous, but not according to the major auto industry. They've made a commitment to hybrids and electric vehicles, and awareness by the community, and what does that mean? Trying to promote, I think we need a more promotion. At the same time, commercial aspects of pushing solar, state are having funding problems. The federal government has withdrawn a lot of money in this area, or plans to, and states can't support it all alone. So there's going to be tough decisions, and how do we benefit as much as we can? And then there's some passive methods besides solar, is people don't think about it, but like you have I forgot what the technical name, but the hall, it needs renovation. It consumes a huge amount of energy right now. And if you want to renovate the building, what's the best way to do that for the dollar and try to minimize your total energy use? So there's different aspects of energy, commercial, residential, and municipal. When you did I understand when you did the police station and added on to that, with all the incorporations, your actual yearly electric bill on the entire plant went down considerably, which is the way you should be thinking. And I know I came to the first meeting you had on the 25-year plan, and now you've had a few meetings on that, but one of the things that was missing out of the initial plan was how to incorporate energy conservation into the plan. Sometimes that can affect your decisions. And, it's very complicated, obviously. You want to keep the view, you want to not create hazards, you want to not create too much urbanization, but you need housing and residential and whatever, and you got to support the economic growth of the community. But you have to do it smartly, and that's why you have a plan. That's why you try to develop a plan. But you got to make sure that it incorporates all the things you need. And I really enjoyed I'm an engineer by trade, and I really enjoyed applying my technical knowledge to real problems,
For the good of the community, yeah. Great. Thank you, David. Any questions or comments from the board for David?
Just thank you very much.
Yeah, so thank you for coming in tonight, and again, we really appreciate you volunteering your time for our community on the Energy Committee. And you heard the spiel about the executive session and how we'll do that, so that'll apply for you as well. Thank you for coming in. Is Justin here?
I should have said this at the start of the meeting. He had a work commitment. He's going to try to come in later on, but if he can't make it, he is otherwise indisposed.
Okay. And what about others who are up for reappointment that end this month that weren't able to come in?
Everybody except for Justin, who's up for a reappointment,
Is that
has
it?
been able to come in.
Oh, that's fantastic. What a good year. Okay. If he doesn't come in, then, we'll talk about that later. Okay. All right, then we're going to move on to our next item of business, which is 5B, that's update on tax sale policy. And with us is Sarah Macy. Hello, Sarah. Good evening. So we recently adopted a new tax sale policy because we saw those numbers and said we needed to do something. We want to do something consistent. And you proposed something that we looked at and tweaked a little bit, and so now we'll hear how it's going.
Overall, I think it's going really well. I was actually just in Randolph at the annual meeting of the Vermont Government Finance Officers Association and speaking with a couple other communities who were, for lack of a better term, jealous at how clear and concise our policy was, and the fact that we had had this conversation and that we were able to come together and agree on some guidelines, and we're now implementing them very successfully. I've just passed out some summary delinquent tax trends that compare the current year, the beginning of April through mid-June versus last year with a graph that I couldn't get to do exactly what I wanted, but this is pretty close. You all read in my memo sort of the narrative of how things have changed since we adopted the policy and sent out the final demand letters from the town. We originally sent out 34 letters to delinquent taxpayers, totaling about $670,000, which was just shy of 70% of the total delinquencies at that time. And as of June 1st, when the list was handed over to the attorney, there were only 14 on that list, which represented $270,000 of delinquencies, or 34% of the delinquencies at that time. There were 7 accounts that paid in full, 12 who've entered into payment plans, and the combination of those 20 brought in about $110,000 as of the writing of this memo, which was last week on the 13th. Those figures correspond just with that very specific list of delinquencies that were on the original tax sale list and got the letter. The ones that met our one of two parameters, which was either $10,000 delinquent in 1 year or multiple years of delinquencies, regardless of the dollar amount. The sheet that I just handed out to you is all delinquencies, and I am really excited about what this tells us. I'd like to start with I'm really excited about numbers in general, so I guess that's not hard. But I'd like to start with the beginning figures, which in the bar graphs, which is probably the easiest to look at, the first bar that I put in there was a mid-April 2018 versus 2017. And as you can see, we were about $300,000 higher in delinquencies in the current year than we were last year at the same time. Now, I don't want to jump to any really obvious conclusions. I wasn't here last year at this time, so it's very possible that we sent out our routine delinquent notice a little earlier. And so we'd started to get some payments in ahead of this time. This year, I can tell you that we sent out our quarterly delinquent notice mid-April, and then we sent out the demand letter at the beginning of May. And as you can see, there was a significant drop from April 15th to May 15th, which crosses the time period where we sent out those two notices. Looking at these beginning balances, I can think of 3 accounts that make up about $150,000 of the difference. Accounts that were delinquent last year that were still delinquent this year, and that their taxes were so much that they really contributed to that jump just on their own. They are all either paid in full or on a significant payment plan at this point.
Great.
I know. So the summary up at the right-hand corner, you can see from where we started at the beginning of April to where we are just on Friday, we've brought in over $500,000 in delinquent tax payments. That's 39% of the starting delinquent balance and over 4% of our budgeted taxes. That's huge. We are down to 6.5% of delinquencies from where we started at just shy of 11%. Another phenomenal change. Last year at this time, even though our dollar amount was slightly lower than it is now, we were a higher percentage of budget for delinquencies. Just today and over the weekend, we brought in another $6,400, and we're at 6.49% delinquencies compared to budget. Before I take any questions you guys have, I want to say that the response to this has been overwhelmingly positive. I haven't had one person angry or frustrated or upset with me, which I was really surprised at. In fact, I've had at least 3 people thank me, which was really surprising. I had one account who didn't know they still owned the land. They thought that it had been, they'd transferred ownership via quick claim deed, but it had just been an easement. The dollar amount was low, so in the normal course of things, it didn't come to their attention, except that when we put in that multiple years, regardless of the dollar amount, they got a letter. And so now they're able to iron out whatever went wrong. And I had another account who was 3 years delinquent, about $60,000, who had been paying property taxes into escrow, and the escrow company wasn't remitting them to the town. I know. So we, the taxpayer and I got on a conference call with the escrow company, and they did end up paying in full. So hopefully that taxpayer is getting a new escrow company, but that's outside of my purview.
Wise choice.
So those are that's my report to date so far. The list has been handed over to the attorney. We have discussed a few logistical items, how we're going to work things, and their para is on their way in this week to start doing title searches. Any questions?
Super job there.
Thank you.
Evan, you have a comment?
And Sarah, just to remind not only the board, but the people in the audience, we offer payment plans.
Absolutely.
And the terms are, for the most part?
For the most part, they're paid in full within a year. At this point, anybody who's been handed over to the attorney will have to make a 50% down payment and then a payment plan to pay in full in monthly installments within 12 months. Up to this point, they've been a little bit more flexible, 12 to 18 months. Everyone has to make at least a monthly payment so it doesn't go too long without knowing whether or not you're going to pay. And I have 28 accounts clipped to my wall over there in my cubicle, and they're all in very good standing. Everyone pays on the day they said they would pay or in advance. So I've been very pleased with the turnout there.
Sounds like we got their attention.
Isn't that great? That was the goal. No.
And the one thing that we have come to learn over the years is the people who pay their taxes are very interested in the people who haven't. And
That's true.
they feel,
Sure.
I paid mine, what is the town doing about the people who didn't pay theirs? So it is an equity issue. And so I applaud the finance department and Sarah in particular for creating the policy and in executing it so well.
Executing it, yeah.
Right. Well, thank you, Evan, and thank you all very much for your support and your conversation. And it's been wonderful so far.
I'll open up to the board for questions. Irene?
Just wondered if, for the sake of the folks viewing at home, whether you have a sheet that Scott could take a picture of
Sure.
so people could just reference what we're
Where do you want me to
doing.
put it?
And same thing for somebody like Greg in the
Closer?
future. If we have stuff like this,
Okay.
is there a way to get it on the screens? Because I'm thinking about people in the audience
Yeah.
who aren't seeing these beautiful pictures that we're seeing.
Well, it's
Is there a
not
way we can
color.
be more effective at sharing with the
Depends on
audience?
how late he
It's
gets
a
it.
future question. Thank you.
You're welcome.
If he gets it with enough time, he could do that, but I think this
I
just
would
came
think
in.
giving staff a heads up that we're expecting to put stuff, no matter how late it comes in, on the screen is just an awareness that I think we can raise maybe with all staff for the future. And it's not about you, it's about everybody and making sure the audience is able to see what we're seeing. Thank you.
Elaine?
It's actually not a question for Sarah, but Scott, if you needed to drop in a graphic in your video, would it be best if it were a PowerPoint or a PDF? What would be best for you?
I'm not in charge of post-production on these things, and I get a feeling that that would be email or a question to LG.
Got it, okay.
So, we're members of the Board of Civil Authority, and we've seen some people come in who seem to be so far behind that they're not gonna be able to get out. This new policy, though, will help prevent people from getting in such
Absolutely.
bad ways. So that's great. Mike, did I see your hand up?
You did. Sarah, can you tell us first of all, congratulations. This is, I think, working better than any of us would have guessed for the first time out. The 14 people that are still out there, any kind of reaction from them, tales of woe, or
No,
just ignoring the letter, or
Pretty much just ignoring. There is one account on there that I've had multiple communications with, and reminders that once it goes to the attorney, the deal is half of this very large balance. Let's do something. Can you bring $5,000 in, or $6,000? I mean, the balance is another $60,000 one. Let's come in. Let's talk. Let's get some money flowing. A good faith effort to bring your account into good standing is all we ask. And so that is the only one that I've had communications with that didn't come in before it went to the attorney. Which is kind of a bummer.
Any other questions for Sarah? Thanks for the update, Sarah. And
Absolutely.
again, we're pleased to see that this program is working. I think having a policy that's very clear so everybody knows what to expect is the right way to go. And it looks like it's producing the results we hoped and beyond. So
Thank you all very much.
thank you, sir. Okay, before we move on to the next item, we didn't quite finish 5A because Justin wasn't here, but he did just pop in the back there. So can I get, would the board be okay to amend the agenda to go back to 5A so we can talk to Justin?
So moved.
Thank you, Irene. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, any further discussion about amending the agenda so we can go back to 5A for Justin? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, motion passes 5-0. Hello, Justin. Welcome. Yeah, please have a seat up there. And you're up for reappointment on the Zoning Board of Adjustment. And what we like. Whoop. You weren't here in the beginning, where we just were told, don't touch them. No problem. So we just like to hear from you to see how things are going and if there's things you want to make sure that we know about from the ZBA.
Definitely. First, sorry for being late. In my day job, I'm an attorney for the city of Burlington, so I was actually dealing with city council tonight in the sort of staff capacity. Things are going well. I think it's been a year, blends together, but I think a year on the zoning board now. It's been good. We had sort of inconsistencies with meetings, so it's hard to really get a flow together when we have gone sometimes a few months, but I think it's been going pretty well. We've been digging into some issues. Sharon is an amazing staffer. We've added some dynamic people. We've had a bit of turnover, which is both good and bad. You sort of lose the historical knowledge, and sort of it ends up I'm chair, and so it ends up me often sort of being like, so what's going on? So that's been fun, learning a lot of colloquial isms for parts of town that I only know by roads, which is fun. So no, I think it's good. I think hopefully we'll just keep getting momentum in terms of as a sort of a new board in terms of composition, but it's been wonderful.
Super. Yeah, the ZBA doesn't meet regularly. They only meet when they're needed.
Exactly.
For an issue, right?
Compared to like every 2 weeks, like for the planning commission, we are the first Thursday of every month, but it's tough if we go a few months. If we get 3 applications 1 month and we don't get one for 2 months, then we're seeing each other every quarter. So it's.
I wanted to make sure that people didn't think it was being dysfunctional.
Oh yeah, no. We actually do
Only
meet when
schedule when
applications
you
are there.
have.
Yes. Sorry, I didn't want to give that impression for the record.
So, staff puts together the cases and the issues, correct?
Yeah, sort of a staff report along with the applicant's materials.
And most of your cases are what for the audience?
Generally when there are variations from the zoning regulations. So it's a review of what the variance is being requested by variance. It could be a setback variance. It could be coverage. There's all sorts of, we had one recently, a warehouse is another possible use in certain commercial zones. So it's about whether that's going to be allowed, and so the board sort of reviews the rules, reviews the applications, hears from the applicants, and then judges whether a variance is basically called for at that time. Usually, because of how zoning regulations are, planning commission ultimately generally has sort of a Venn diagram. They tend to cover a lot of the same applications and the same sort of issues. So, but it is really nice to sort of hear directly from applicants, really dig in and look at whether a variance might fit in that particular unit, and it's in that particular application.
Variance from the zoning regs.
Exactly, yes.
Any questions for Justin? Mike?
I've served on the ZBA. I had 3 years there before I started doing this. I thank you very much. And you're right, the inconsistency of meetings where you have one night with 3 applications and then a month or 2 with nothing. You're right, that does take some getting used to, but appreciate you being willing to step up again.
Great. I thought about putting something out on Front Porch Forum asking for applications, but I guess Sharon didn't want to see that.
No, that wouldn't be necessary.
Yeah, please don't.
So, any other comments, questions? If not, Justin, thank you again for stepping forward I know you're a busy man, but you have time to volunteer in our community. We appreciate that. So you weren't here to hear what our process is, but for reappointments, we invite people in for reappointment to come in and talk to us, to let us know how things are going. And then it's up to the board if we want to go into executive session to discuss the reappointments. Then we would come out and make a decision, and then somebody from the manager's office would contact you tomorrow. But we really do appreciate all the work you do on that. Okay. Yeah. So as long as we're back on 5A, I want to ask the board, would you like to wait to the end to go into executive session, or are you comfortable doing anything in the open meeting?
I would say that if Darren's okay with a couple of minute delay, I'd say we do it now. I can't really see anything.
Are you okay doing an open? Okay, great. Then I would entertain a motion to reappoint these folks. So who would like to do it? Irene?
I would move that we reappoint Christine Hammer and Dan Stein to the Conservation and Trails Committee, David Gottlieb to the Energy Committee, and Justin St. James to the ZBA.
Thank you, Irene. Do I have a second for that?
Second.
Thank you, Andy. Any further discussion about the reappointments of Christine, Dan, David, and Justin? Okay, hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Okay, now we're going to move on to business item 5C, which is adoption of the Indian Brook Forest Management Plan. And who's going to kick that off? Ethan? Okay, so Ethan Tapper, I'll invite you up to the table there. Don't touch the mic, though.
Yeah, please.
Don't want you getting yelled at. welcome. You were here a while ago and
Last year, I think, yeah.
walked us through the management plan.
Yep.
We had some feedback for you, such as outreach and making sure you were talking with the rec department anytime any work would be done. And we received a tracked change
Yep.
version
Yep.
in there. And so why don't you tell us about the things that you did address since last time you were here?
Yeah, so I think some of the things that we wanted to make clear, I mean, there's a number of sort of little things that you all can see from that document. I know that we wanted to make clear costs for things, and so that none of these things would be sort of like an unfunded mandate where that money could come from. Also, some clarifying language about deer hunting. That's a recommendation that I have. I don't have any interest in superseding anyone else in terms of dictating what the firearm ordinances are or anything like that. But I did. The outcome that I'm looking for in this case is a recognition of the fact that deer overpopulation is a real thing, and there are other means to control that population. So I just sort of put some more information about that. Some sort of semantic details like making it clear that as I referred to certain things in the management plan, that they were not in order of priority. And then just in general, filling in some more information about the things that I was prescribing. We also had some other changes. So some things came to light about access to the access through Brigham Hill Lane. We maybe do not have access through Brigham Hill Lane in the way that we thought we did. And so so we just figured that out sort of in the last couple days. And I'd actually sort of had already sort of put aside and said, let's actually scale back the harvesting that we're prescribing in this 10-year period in general and push the dates back so we have more time to sort of like, if this is going to happen, we're going to have time to react to it and people are going to have a chance to sort of get used to it rather than just sort of going for it in a way that could be seen to be too intense or, sort of overwhelming to the community. And then we found out that we didn't have access through Brigham Hill Lane anyway. So that's a big change. So basically what is now prescribed, again, the dates have been pushed back, but is harvesting primarily to the western portion of the property in the next 10 years. And that would be over 2 separate, basically, entries through the McGee Road access. And I think that I really appreciated having the time. We tried to get the word out to a lot of people about the management plan and led 2 public walks. We had a high school student doing outreach just to let people know that the management plan existed, and that they had a chance to read it and comment on it. And the Conservation Trails Committee also did a really good job of reaching out to let people know how they could do that. And yeah, it was nice to sort of take a little bit more time with it and think about it. And I feel really good about the plan that we have here now.
Can you share what the general comments were?
Yeah, I mean, we honestly did not receive comments sort of in the way that I was hoping that we were going to. So I was hoping that we were going to have sort of a substantive body of comments that would say, this is how I use Indian Brook, this is how I regard these things. And we did not have the kind of engagement that I wish that we had. But it just gave me a little bit more time to talk to folks in Essex. And I think the big takeaway for me is that it's very important to me and to my mission in this role to help people understand what responsible forest stewardship is. And that's, the goal of all of this is protecting forests, making sure our forests are healthy, and showing people how they can engage with forests in a positive way and keep these forests working in a way that's positive for them. And talk about what high quality forest management looks like. And, also recognizing though that this is a sanctuary for people in Essex. This is where a lot of people go, and this is very important and personal to them in a way that is not personal to me. And so I think just trying to scale back what we're doing and be really responsible to it and think about ahead of time what these outreach components are so people understand it and so it's not confusing or surprising, and that people have a really good body of knowledge to sort of draw on when they're regarding the work that we're trying to do, I think is really important. And so that I think is the most sort of general input that I received was that feeling, and then I tried to incorporate that into the how I amended the recommendations in the plan.
Can you tell us how you plan on coordinating the work activity with our rec department?
Yeah, so I think that the biggest coordination would have to be obviously outreach about when things are happening. So already we've been coordinating about these public walks, and we'd be coordinating with them to schedule, when we have public walks. My idea is to have a number of different times when the public can visit the area that we're working in and see it, and so we coordinate with them for that reason. We also really need to be smart about trail closures for safety and for liability. And for how we're going to organize which trails we're going to use. So a lot of the existing recreational trails are on old log roads. And so I think that it's going to be a discussion with Parks and Rec about the areas that they know to be sensitive areas, the areas that are trailed areas, and how we can sort of plan our trail system really carefully so we interfere with the least amount of recreation possible. So the idea would be that we would be interfering with people's access to the park for the least amount of time in the least expansive way. So we'd be targeting small areas, and then Parks and Rec would be in touch with the public. We'd be sort of cordoning off these areas, and then we'd move on. And then we'd be touching base with Parks and Rec about restoring any areas of trail system that may have gotten damaged or displaced or anything like that. And that's sort of the vision. I absolutely can't do it without them. So it would be, I think, being in touch with them well ahead of time to get a really detailed plan is a big part of what that'll look like.
Okay, so you'll work
And
with
then for
them
the outreach.
and not go forward until they're on board
That's right.
with the plan.
Yep.
Good, thank you.
Yeah, it's sort of an interesting, a lot of the town forests I work on are sort of more strictly in the town forest arena, and this really is it's a combination town forest park.
It's
So
a very important park. That,
it sure is, yeah. It sure is.
Thank you. Questions, comments from the board for Ethan? Anybody? Andy?
So I wasn't able to make it to either of your walks. I wish I had, but how many people did you get? What was the participation?
I think we got maybe 13 the first one and maybe 11 the second one.
Good size group.
Yeah, it's hard getting people to show up for stuff, and then you hope that you've made it clear enough the ways that people can comment so that when things do start to happen, at least they know that they've had the chance to. But yeah, so we advertised those, I think, pretty extensively through our outreach with the high school student that we had, Valerie Bissett, is that right? She did an awesome job posting all around town saying, there's a forest management plan, this is where you can get in touch with it, these are your chances to make comments.
Good, thank you. Other questions for Ethan? Irene?
You mentioned some potential changes to the access to Brigham Hill Lane. Do you expect that you'll update this plan to reflect our new knowledge now?
Yeah, so that's basically what it says in the plan now is with the most recent version is we do not, as far as we know, we don't have access. We're not obviously going to move forward with any forest management until we do have access. But we should try and figure out what the access is, and because it's still unclear what it is. So one of the undated action items in the plan is try and figure out what access we have and what we're allowed to do.
So, to answer Irene's question, so it doesn't sound like it needs to be updated then?
I
with
think
this?
it's already in there, but if it's not clear, then it should be.
I think Darren might have some more insight to that.
Clarify a little bit what we discovered. The town does have a right-of-way easement into the park. So it's a pedestrian or non-motorized easement only. At the end of Brigham Hill Lane, there's about 1,000 feet where it goes from public right-of-way to easement over that land. It would not allow for logging as far as we know and any sort of access for forestry. That could be negotiated with the landowner, or it could, there's other potential options for how to get into that part of it. So right now, people can walk into Indian Brook from that road. We couldn't do forestry activities there as far as we can tell, but we'd have to research the deed itself and maybe get a legal opinion as to what it actually allows.
Thank you for that clarification.
Yeah.
Okay, other questions, comments? Irene?
Appreciate the updates that you made. It added a lot of what I was missing last time. One of my questions has to do with the timber production section. You talk about we make choices of which trees to retain and not, according to the ecological or the economic or human desires, like what the management objectives are. And can you just give me some examples, not to put you on the spot, but
Yeah.
what a management objective would be that doesn't involve money or nature? Because I just couldn't think of any. off the
Yeah,
top
I
of
mean,
my
that's a
head.
really good question. So, another example could be, we talk about establishing, like structural objectives for the stand, like creating structure. So I guess, that still ties into ecological. I guess sort of one of the hard things about silviculture and forestry in general is just, everything we're doing is in some way framed within human objectives. And so even when our human objective is our desire to not see like a degradation of wildlife habitat, that's still our human objective. And so I guess that's what I was trying to put across. But yeah.
So more of a macro human goal versus a micro, I don't want that tree there kind of goal.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's helpful.
Anybody else? Okay, I'd like to open it up to the public for comments, so I'd like to open it up. Yeah, Dan? You can just, actually right from there be fine. Just project if you would. Well, then, okay, then take a seat right next to Ethan. That's what we've been doing today.
Well, first comment is thank you to Ethan for the immense amount of work that you've put into this and to a willingness to change what the feedback that you have received indicates needs to be changed. So I can't think of anybody else who would have done a better job from the framework of where you're coming from. So one of the things that you mentioned in the forest management plan is that
Dan, you're actually going to be talking to me.
Oh. Okay. Well, one of the things that has Ethan has mentioned in the plan is that nature could do the same job, just would require roughly twice as long to get it done. So, in terms of where we're going and what the final result would be, there's no necessity to do the kind of major upheaval that's involved in the current forest management plan. One of the things, by the way, I was the sole person from the Trails and Conservation Committee, but I'm speaking now as an individual. I'm not speaking on behalf of either committee.
Yeah, thank you for that clarification.
So, I was, I believe, the only member of the committee to show up for one of Ethan's trail walks. So I made a special sacrifice in my otherwise plans to be able to do that. One of the things that got said was a sort of critical of the not in my backyard syndrome. We all use paper products. We all use lumber or almost all use lumber for our buildings, our houses, that it's to a certain degree hypocritical to use forest products without being willing to sacrifice some forest to do it. My comment on that one is that point well taken, but Indian Brook Park is first off a park, not an Indian Brook forest, commercial forest area. Second is that if we do have to do some disruption, we should not be sacrificing areas that have recreational use daily to something which is seen by the broader public almost never, such as the working forest of the Northeast Kingdom, which is a lot larger than Indian Brook Park and a lot more remote, and most people who've used Indian Brook Park have never seen the Northeast Kingdom working forests. So it's not an apples to apples comparison to say that we should be willing to sacrifice some of Indian Brook Park to demonstrate our lack of hypocrisy on the use of forest products. Some weeks ago on Vermont Public Radio, there was a reportage on some very carefully harvested forest and the measurement of the forest health by birdsong. And they had discovered that though the disappearance of much of the diversity of birds accompanying the harvesting was to be expected, they did not find the gradual replenishment of diversity that they were expecting, and that a decade after the forest harvesting had happened, the forest had not recovered in any meaningful way from the effects of harvesting. I don't know the exact date. I can find out from Vermont Public Radio which program it was and which particular detail within the program showed this unexpected failure to be resilient. This is of particular concern because we are expecting the damage done to be by harvesting at Indian Brook to be very temporary and very rapidly repaired by nature. And the sole experiment that has come to my attention says, sorry, it doesn't work that way. And I would not, coming back exclusively to Indian Brook Park, it's an experiment on a very large scale compared to the total scale of the town of Essex. And if we don't have any commensurate certainty about the park to recover and fulfill our ambitions for it, we really should not be mucking around with it. We really should be doing an absolute minimum of disruption, because counting on it to repair itself is counting on something that is by no means guaranteed, and our best knowledge now indicates that it will not happen.
Do you have much?
Two more items. One is on the same note. It could be very useful to segregate the land as to park versus non-park, and to maintain, I would hope, say 80% of the Indian Brook Reservoir Park as park, not as woodlot. I've heard from Ethan today movement in that direction, and I would like to encourage that we have a clear declaration of what parts of the park are to be allowed to be managed by nature versus what parts of the park are human management. An example of human management which I entirely approve is trying to actually prune back and maintain the remnants of the one-time orchards. I'm very much in favor of that, and that as a departure from parkland. Another departure would be the recreational use of the reservoir for water sports, excluding motorboats. I heartily agree with that, and I would not want to see that restored to its original pre-human intervention. And last point, if the modest amount of income available from the timber harvest and sale is an issue, talk to me. I could perhaps replace part or even all of that lost revenue to conserving the park.
Thank you for your comments, Dan. Appreciate that. Thank you for coming in tonight.
For hearing.
Yeah, thank you, Daniel.
So, Ethan, maybe you could touch on the metrics. That's kind of an interesting point. That you do the work, and then how do you verify that that it worked to what you anticipated? I know that a lot of years have to go by, but
Yeah, a lot of years have to go by. I mean, I think that there's a lot of, that's a really good point. So there's a lot of good ways to sort of turn, these activities into, science, where we can study those things. I don't know the study that Daniel was talking about. I think that there's a whole lot of science that bears out a different story. But I think that there's a lot of opportunities for us to do baseline monitoring and to see what happens. But I think that in any case, monitoring would be a very important part of it. There's, a whole body of science about these things and about how forests regenerate and grow and develop that don't necessarily bear that narrative out. Indian Brook's a really special place. Who knows exactly how it'll manifest. So I think, monitoring would be a part of it. I'd like to do it, I think, looping in the high school would be a really neat thing to do. I've done some work with the forestry tech program in particular. And they also have a pretty cool natural sciences curriculum that they could be out there monitoring for birdsong. Audubon has also been really instrumental in my work with private landowners and on town forests and on schoolyard forests to try and get some bird monitoring done. I would also finally say that there's a toolkit called the Foresters for the Birds Toolkit, which is basically how we manage forests with birds in mind. And basically it's targeting mostly our neotropical songbirds and specific species that tell us that we have a healthy, robust, diverse forest, and that all of the things that I've prescribed in this management plan are certainly in line with that. It's called the Foresters for the Birds Toolkit, and it was with the Vermont Audubon.
And are there other areas within the park that will not be managed and just left for wild?
Yeah, I think that there's the huge area adjacent to all the hydrologic features. There's a whole stand 4 that's a rare chestnut oak community that I think would be the idea would be no management unless it would in some way benefit that community, and all the cultural features on the property. And then there's a number of also areas where the soils are too thin, areas where the soils are where it's too steep, where we couldn't, in good conscience, ever harvest without doing damage to the forest.
So there will be some areas left to go.
Oh yeah, yeah. No, it's the goal. The goal of this is not to harvest over every inch of the park, nor is that what's prescribed in the management plan. The goal of this is just to sort of take this thing, which is the active management of a forest, for good reasons, and for the education and the outreach of the community of Essex, and for the benefit of Essex's wildlife that are using these areas, and to sort of use that in a way that's going to be ultimately helpful and net positive for the health of our forest. The goal of this is not to turn Essex or turn Indian Brook into any sort of hyper-managed zone, because we also know that doesn't work. So that's actually, Saxon Hill, which the town of Essex has now received some of their other historic Essex Junction Village water forests back, was an example of these mistaken ideas we had a long time ago that humans were supposed to manage every variable of the forest for maximum efficiency of timber production, and that's absolutely not what we're trying to do.
And any harvesting of timber would not just be for income, but it would be, rather than chop it up, be able to get some income to put back into this. And you said 25% of it would be used for...
That was my recommendation. Yeah, to be put back in. And then I know there's also a conservation fund that could be a potential receiver of that income. But I would think about it as terms of that's something, there will be income generated, probably. And that would be a really good way to use that income. The goal wouldn't be to generate income to do anything in particular.
Sort of as a byproduct.
Yeah, exactly. And then, and I think that in addition to creating a more resilient forest, creating a healthier forest, which this does in the long term, in the face of climate change and all these other issues that I sort of touch on in the forest management plan, I think that the education and outreach component is really, really important as we think about how to manage our working lands that surround us in a way that's really, really responsible.
Good. Thank you, Ethan. Questions? Yeah, Andy.
Yeah, I just realized I'm confused about this access question. Is it the access that you were talking about earlier, is that just to one part of the park, or is that the only access that...
So that is, I think, the only access that makes sense to the northeastern part of the park. And so the western side, I think, can be accessed by McGee Road.
Okay. All right.
And southern areas could be accessed by the parking lot, but we don't want to use the parking lot as a long landing.
Other questions for Ethan? Okay, what's the board's pleasure? Anybody?
Yep. I move that the select board adopt the revised Indian Brook Conservation Area Forest Management Plan.
Thank you, Andy. Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
Thank you, Irene. Any further discussion on adopting the forest management plan for Indian Brook? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion passes unanimously. Ethan, thank you for
Thank you.
all your hard work on that and maintaining that gem that we have, that we call Indian Brook. Thank you. Okay, we're gonna move on to business item 5D, and that's adoption of town street tree management plan. And Darren, wanna come up and talk to us about this one? And Christine. Hi.
Good to see you again.
Yeah, no, don't move the mic.
Yep, I just remembered.
Oh, whoa. Very
And we
good.
do actually have several other members of the Conservation and Trails Committee here. I'd love to invite them up to.
Sure, let's
talk
do that too.
If you
Yeah.
want.
Justin? Good idea. Dan?
To introduce yourselves and others.
So my name is Darren Schibler. I'm the town planner. I'm also a former member of the Conservation and Trails Committee, or rather the Conservation Committee. Christine Hammer here is the vice chair of the Conservation and Trails Committee, and Justin is a member of the committee as well.
And recording
And,
secretary. And recording
And recording secretary. And Dan Stein is also a member of the Conservation and Trails Committee.
Dan, did you want to join them up there, or are you comfortable where you are?
I'm comfortable where I am.
Okay.
I
Um,
didn't have any part to role to play in the street tree management.
So you have seen this relatively recently. This is the revised street tree management plan. So you saw the original version. We made a few minor edits. Most notably, we talked about Tree City USA recognition at the last meeting. So we had changed some of the goals in the plan to reflect actually achieving Tree City USA recognition.
Which the village already has,
The
right?
village already has through the work of the Tree Advisory Committee. There were a few other cosmetic grammatical changes. One of the other things that we found out relatively recently from the Vermont Urban and Community Forestry Program is that imidacloprid, which is one of the insecticides recommended for emerald ash borer treatment and Asian longhorn beetle treatment, has actually not been recommended for use because of its potential effect on other insects and other parts of the ecology. So they have recommended, and I can never remember the name and how to pronounce it, but
Different chemical.
it's another
It's a different.
another insecticide that's actually a derivative of neem oil. So we've incorporated that into the language of the plan. We still have an appendix that talks about using imidacloprid in terms of the costs, but we just recommend not using that if the town decides to do any sort of preservation of large trees that they want to protect from any of these pests. So happy to talk more about some of the Tree City USA or other changes that we made in the plan.
Okay, well, I'll open it up to the board for specific questions from anybody. Andy?
So in the memo that was provided in our packet that precedes the management plan, under costs, it implies that the town outside the village could become a tree city, but the town outside the village is not a legal entity in itself. And so I'm wondering if that's been appropriately considered, that maybe we need to partner somehow with the village, since they are part of the town,
Absolutely.
and include their population and their spending in whatever cost we figure for this, because
I should have made the memo a little clearer in that the costs that would be additional to what the village is already providing for their Tree City USA designation is what I presented here. That would count towards the whole town's
Okay.
designation, I believe. I'd have to check with the Arbor Day Foundation to be absolutely sure. And I don't know if they do a lot with communities like ours where there's an incorporated village within that town. But as far as I understand, the total per capita for any municipality would just have to be $2, whether it's met by a sub portion of that population or throughout the whole town budget. And I am not an expert on the town village nuances in terms of finance and budgeting and taxes, so that's something that we would want to work with the select board on in terms of how that would be handled. And I know that there are talks about alignment and consolidation, so there may be other ways to make that process simpler as time goes on. But as far as what would be needed above and beyond what the village already does is what is presented in your memo.
Does that answer your question, Andy?
It does, and I guess the other piece is that, right, any costs that are brought forward on this would also be paid by the town residents who live in the village, so there's can't just tax outside the village independently, at least I don't think we should.
So maybe we need a better cost analysis and analysis of what those would actually be in total, and then split it up appropriately.
Thank you.
I know that both boards have discussed alignment of policies and procedures and even ultimately committees. And I think this one would be ripe. There is a lot of expertise both in the town with conservation and with the village with their trees and the people who we ask to volunteer in those areas. We have a wealth of knowledge about the ecology and trees in particular. So I think it's sort of setting itself up nicely for some work together in both areas. That's a statement. The question comes in is public outreach, public education of ash borer, not only of what we are going to have to do in the parkway, which is the place in between the curb and the sidewalk for the most part, and then also what has to occur on private property if you have a infested tree, which it doesn't necessarily have to be ash borer, but that's the bug du jour. I made that up myself. We've gone through elm disease and Dutch elm disease and things of that nature. And maybe you could also give us a little bit of what the plan calls for the people who don't have it in front of them and why we're going to do it the way we're going to do it.
The plan does talk about doing some outreach and points to itself in a way as some of the resources, the treatment and the way you would approach this as a private landowner are very similar. Assess your tree and consider how you want to deal with it. The Vermont Urban and Community Forestry Program, the state level agency that works on this, has a lot of great resources for both municipalities and homeowners. So we would likely just use a lot of their knowledge and materials and just try to get that out to the Essex community specifically, and make sure that people around in our area are aware of what that means for them. And it means different things for different kinds of landowners. Someone who has a quarter or an eighth acre lot that's in an urban area is going to treat very differently than someone who has a large tract of forest land who may need to think about larger ecology issues, and just the bigger cost of managing for ash and other trees that are susceptible. But as far as outreach, that's something that is one of the next steps after this plan is adopted, is start that outreach. And we only added the Tree City USA, public outreach component recently. So Conservation and Trails Committee hasn't really talked about specifically what those would look like, what that outreach would look like. But we would obviously draw on the knowledge of the Tree Advisory Committee because they've done a really good job of doing that outreach and doing events and doing education in the village. So it would likely mirror what they do.
At our cleanup days, we've had information and handouts for people talking about emerald ash borer, about the longhorn Asian beetle, so, you know, and other invasives. They're not just bug invasives, they're plant invasives and animal invasives. So, we're doing that also at those events and at town meeting, at our table. We always have, again, information and handouts. And, you know, people are becoming more aware of it just because it has hit the airwaves. So we're ready with information for people. But we'll be doing, you know, more, that's gonna be, it's gonna be more
Proactive.
yeah, I'm sorry, I had taught a class all day today, so I've spoken out, but, it'll be more of a priority now because it is in the state. So it is there, it is here.
So one of the requirements of getting recognized as a Tree City USA is to have a board that takes care of the tree issue. And I know the village has a tree committee or tree commission. Is it possible for the Conservation Trails Committee to be that committee to take this on?
Absolutely.
Seems like it might be a good match there as opposed to adding a new committee.
Oh, yeah, and I don't think anybody would recommend adding another committee just for
Okay.
urban tree care. And I think, I won't speak for the Conservation Trails Committee, but they've been very involved and interested in urban tree care, and I would think would be willing to be that committee.
And there is a wealth of knowledge in the village, so to start to cooperate with them on that, yeah. Yes.
So Darren, back to the plan, the town is gonna have to, or consider removing trees in the parkway that are ash. They'll be selected, for various reasons. Can you maybe give a little sense of how you would pick them and why you would pick them, and what the overall plan's goals are?
So the plan talks about this removal process, and it recommends first doing anything that is already diseased or on its way out, because those will need to go anyway, and they are the most susceptible to any sort of pest or bug. So getting those susceptible trees out is the first priority. And you can see in the data there's already a number that we've identified in the tree survey that should be taken care of soon. And in fact, I think Chuck Vile was just looking at some little leaf linden on one of the Meadows Edge neighborhoods where they're already splitting and they're not going to be doing well, and they don't have any known. He's already keeping track of some of those and taking action. That work would be done either by Public Works or someone they would hire out as a contractor to do the work. And from there, it would be a question of, does the select board want to, or does the town want to do any proactive removal, or wait until a pest is more likely to be in Essex? Right now, it's only in the Washington County and Orange County areas. It's hard to tell how long it will be until it gets to Chittenden County. So it's really a question of, because proactive removal is more cost effective, and that you don't have to deal with hazardous trees and trees that, may drop a limb unexpectedly. It's easier in that respect, but some trees may be resistant. Some trees may not need to be removed in the end. Some we may want to preserve. So that's up to the town as to how they want to manage that. Some of those recommendations are laid out as, doing the proactive removal in areas that are highly dense with ash, and trees that are all of one species, just to buffer against some of those potential issues. So we're bringing that to the board as to what you think is the best course of action, but the recommendation is to do a little bit of proactive removal a little bit at a time and spread out that cost as much as possible over the years.
So you're looking for that tonight, or you're looking really just for us to adopt this tonight?
We can adopt it tonight, and then as a plan for removal starts getting underway, we can then
You'll
talk
come back.
again about how you want to do it, or leave it up to staff and Public Works.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. Okay, open up to the board for questions or comments. Anybody? Yeah, it looks like, something that is valued, these street trees, and it's great to see that we have a plan to take care of that, and we'll have the discussion later, but proactive at a lower cost. If it's inevitable, maybe there'll be a magic bullet that they devise to stop this. I don't know, but it doesn't look like it, right?
They're looking at, oh, go ahead.
Well, I was gonna say, they're now recommending not cutting all the trees. Before it was like cut all the trees, and they're finding that some trees have some resistance. But also there's so much attention on this because an ash was a very important urban tree. So I think that there's going to be more research and more studies and more information as time goes on. So
you might be able to identify which trees may be resistant, you think?
That's
yeah,
sort of a wait and see, because we don't know they're resistant until they fight it off.
Right.
But there are also programs from the USDA trying to look at natural controls, biological controls, so a pest or a pathogen that will actually target emerald ash borer, for instance, and stop it from spreading the way it has been. It's worked for other invasive pests, but it may not for ash or any other pest. It's hard to see. But that's why we're not recommending wholesale cutting all at once, because that would also be a huge impact on communities and on the urban health of the urban forest, similar to what we talked about with the Indian Brook Forest Management Plan, and the cost all at once.
Okay, good, thank you. All right, what's the board's pleasure then? Sure.
I'd move that Select Board adopt the revised Town of Essex Street Tree Management Plan.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mike. Any further discussion on adopting the town street tree management plan? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. Thank you all for the hard work that you do in keeping our community a great place. Okay, we're going to move on to our next item of business, which is 5E, and I see that Jen just joined us. Hello, Jen. You want to come on up? Jen's here to talk about, give us an update of the firearms ordinance project. We had a big event on June 5th, I know, and there's opportunity to add your comments online, and we want to talk a little bit about that, see if we can improve that somehow to make it easier to access. But welcome, Jen. Thank you for coming in and sharing your thoughts with how things are going.
My thoughts of how things are going. Well, we're underway.
Yes.
It's busy. I do have a couple of questions for you to consider, but I also am wondering what you're wondering, because we haven't gotten a chance to connect yet around it. So I can be available for questions. I can start with some of the things I was wondering from you.
You want to just give a high level about that June 5th meeting, how well it was attended, and what kind of, did you collect what you hoped to collect at that gathering?
You know, I don't have specific hopes for what to gather or not to gather.
Okay.
It was well attended. It was a busy night. There was a lot going on. The notes are on PlaySpeak, if you're looking for the content.
And it was video too, right? The first
there was good
part
video.
was. And then it broke into a few groups, but each group was not videoed, right?
No, that's right. But thanks to Channel 17 for videoing that first section, because it really ended up being a pretty comprehensive overview of a lot of what was in the memo, content-wise. So the breakout groups were by geography. The assumption that I had in that was thinking that each different region might have some different considerations. And I would say that one observation I have is that it was very hard for the group, for those assembled, to really think about those middling options. It just wasn't very appealing to think about the middling options. So there's a lot of comments, if you look at the notes, to either extreme or the other, but not a whole lot of the cautions or benefits with those middle in-between options. Interesting observation. I don't know what will happen with PlaySpeak, but that was the outcome at the forum.
Okay.
Now, PlaySpeak does have some questions.
To that. Yeah.
So PlaySpeak is a new, it's new for us too, so we have a learning curve on it. I've been hearing different things about it. Some people, there's certainly people on the forum. Have you gotten a chance to look at it yet?
I have not.
I have a little bit.
Yeah.
Somebody contacted me and said that there was some abusive discussions going on in there, so that's why I went to take a look.
Yeah. Abusive conversations, is that what you said?
I had someone called me and asked to meet them for coffee earlier this week, or not earlier this week, as it was last week, sorry. This is pretty early this week, isn't it?
Yeah, we're still on Monday.
It's been a long
day,
Friday
but-
last week, but anyway, there were a couple of comments that were made that I'll get to, I guess, eventually here, but one of them was that there was some abusive discussions going on, that people were, some difficult things were coming up.
I do
with
think it's
specific
difficult.
names.
I think there are specific, there are a couple different dynamics that I'm watching on PlaySpeak. And part of it is trying to figure out, lots of times when when I watch things unfold on Front Porch Forum, there are many times where I'll see an extreme sort of message or comment come up. And that's sort of the beginning of a process. And then some of the more moderate voices start to consider what some of those more extreme voices might post in the beginning. So one of the things that I'm looking at for PlaySpeak is to see what happens over time as some of these conversations start to temper a little bit. And I don't know. I mean, that's the big exploration for all of us. But if you do have specific concerns, particularly after having coffee with someone and getting to understand what are the things that they're worried about and, what's the impact that that's having on their ability to participate, that is a very timely topic for today.
Okay. Did you have any follow-up, Andy?
Yeah, so I guess the other comment that I heard was that there was some speculation by some of the attendees that not all of the attendees were actually from Essex, and I don't know if there's any way or any effort to control who.
Are you talking about the forum or PlaySpeak? So if there's a sign-in sheet, if you'd like to look at those names, you certainly can. They're posted in the minutes. You can run them against a list of Essex residents. There wasn't any effort at the door to say that non-Essex residents couldn't come. Open forum.
Elaine, did you?
I just have some feedback to share. I had heard from a couple folks who attended the forum that the whole group portion was great, but then when there were breakouts, the breakout that these folks attended, there were definite arguments back and forth between audience members that the facilitator was not able to get a hold of. And they felt, these particular folks were people who were not hunters, and they felt
vulnerable.
They felt ganged up on, and that was difficult for them. And then I received some feedback regarding PlaySpeak, regarding difficult to navigate. They didn't realize why there was a delay. And
Delay in what?
the delay in establishing your residency to be allowed to comment.
So there is for some, and for some people will experience a delay and others won't. So I think that's a very individual case. We can talk about that in a minute, but the rest of your feedback?
That was it. It was just those few things that I just shared.
So about the forum, there are things that might change for the July 19th forum that might handle or at least respond to some of those concerns. I think, generally speaking, my default is that people always have a choice for what they choose to share in any given forum. And a facilitator will do the best that he or she can do to respond to those dynamics as they unfold. So, I think if there was any really difficult fallout that impacted somebody in a highly negative and very permanent way, it would be really important for me to know, and this isn't the forum to be able to share that. But generally, when I look at the event overall, I don't see marks like that. What I do see is a thread that sounds common, or it sounds like echoes of the way this conversation might have unfolded in the past, that it felt very polarizing, and potentially that there were louder voices and then quieter voices, and this fear that there might be retribution for what you might say. That is one of the reasons we chose PlaySpeak, that it's a forum that allows for some transparency about the process, candor, and assures privacy. So people can, in order to participate in PlaySpeak, they do need to be authenticated to a certain geography. That means they need to sign up with their real name and their real address and a real phone number in some cases. But then they can turn their settings so they're anonymous. What that does is it means that you have a record of all the participants available to you who participate in PlaySpeak, but it is completely separate from the content of integrity to know that who's in the conversation. But it also gives a high level of privacy in that it separates that content piece, if someone wishes, from the feedback that they're giving. So that fear of retribution, now I can't speak to what people choose to put in their post, but depending on how they craft their messages, that fear of retribution should be more manageable on an individual level, individual choice. The other thing we are thinking about is what happens to a public record. If I were to say, do an online survey and be trying to check, are these residents against the impact or the feedback that they gave, that record would link the name with the feedback. And I didn't want to set anyone up in this situation for a future public records request that would then leave them vulnerable in some way, which is again why we chose to go with PlaySpeak. It's really the only platform that we can find that makes this as transparent a process as possible. Again, that really depends on participants choosing to be transparent and to use it. So one of the my objective for being here is not only to be present, but also to really listen and follow up on the kinds of things that might make it difficult for people to use this platform. Because I don't want you to be in the bind of trying to deliberate around feedback that you're getting anecdotally from feedback that's showing up in the public discourse. So if someone can't make it to a forum, either because it's too difficult or because it's too intimidating for any reason, PlaySpeak does give a place for those comments to go in a very measured, trackable, candid, transparent, and private way. Now, for that amount, that level of quality, it does require that you need to that the sign-on is a little more arduous. Now, I have an option to make the multi-level authentication, I think, to make it mandatory. I haven't yet. So right now, it's still requesting that people verify at least one piece of information. If we need to go that extra bump up for security to make sure we know who's in there, like if we notice that people are using fake names or fake addresses, then it will ask for 2 pieces of information. Again, all that information is kept in the beginning so that that person gets an account, but it's not linked to the content that then they submit to PlaySpeak. I have reached out to folks who have been, where I've heard that they've been frustrated with if I had their contact name, and usually after a conversation it resolves. And sometimes there's been some pushback for folks who PlaySpeak has actually had to reach out to a couple of individuals to figure out what's going on. You know, why are you using this name that's not a real name? It might be something much more generic. PlaySpeak will actually reach out to that person to be able to say, we do need to have your name in order for you to continue using this service. And that's the case where they might require a PIN, because what they're trying to do is make sure that the people who are in that platform are who they say they are and aren't from California or from some other place entirely, trying to either fill the survey with other responses or just weigh in on a town ordinance that's not their town. Now I do have a couple other questions for how you might want to use PlaySpeak, but let's stay for a moment on any other feedback you've heard from folks or concerns you might have about the platform in general.
Feedback I got was that first event was very positive, the kickoff in particular, the beginning with the discussions, I think Darren and Greg and you.
Oh, yeah, they did an amazing job.
Yeah, I heard really good feedback from folks. And that the individual groups that broke out, yeah, it was a little bit tougher for the facilitator to try to manage the way you are able to. So if there's anything that you can do to maybe a little boost, trainer boost or something to help that.
Trainer boost. One thing I'm thinking is that for the July 19th event, the nature of that event will be different as well, and we might be able to stay in a larger group. Okay. I did hear from a couple folks when they came to the 5th that they were surprised that I was breaking them into smaller groups, and that wasn't, and it was okay, it served that event because we really needed the input. But on July 19th, the objective of that forum is really to share, here are the trends that have been showing up on PlaySpeak, particularly for folks who haven't been there, and because some of the results that are showing up on PlaySpeak aren't seeable to everyone. The survey results are still in a database. I haven't even seen them yet. So that July 19th forum gives folks a chance to hear how I'm starting to digest the material before I give it to you, and be able to see if I've missed any of those categories or trends.
And you put together this tutorial about how to use it. You did that, I guess, a week ago or so?
Oh, how to post anonymously. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And is this being shared with the public on Front Porch Forum then, or how is that getting out to everybody?
And if it hasn't already, is it on PlaySpeak or Front Porch?
It's on PlaySpeak, but you know what's difficult about that is that you have to be kind of savvy in PlaySpeak to find out what you'd want from it. So it might be that it needs to be front and center. You know, we could put it on the town website page.
Would Front Porch Forum be an appropriate place
This
for
was really
something?
well written. I thought Front Porch Forum would be a great place to put it. It's
I
really
think we
clear.
do to make sure people are,
We,
know how to do it would be
we can have
helpful.
Darby post it.
Okay.
So,
Okay, so you're asking if we have any other questions before you ask
Yes.
your questions?
yes,
Okay.
please, go ahead.
So I'm not sure whether I'm behind or not. Should I be looking at stuff, other places that
I love that question.
stuff is available?
Yeah, you're
that-
trying to figure out what's your role on this PlaySpeak site.
Well, it's not just that, but you've mentioned minutes, you've mentioned video,
Okay. So,
and you asked us not to go to the meetings,
oh, fascinating, right.
right? So, like I said, I feel like I'm behind at this point.
Okay, yeah,
Should
I
I,
don't
or-
think you're behind, but definitely let's fill in the gaps. There's not confusion about it. Irene, did you have a related observation to it?
Yes, I went to it and I was approached by a citizen who said, I heard you weren't supposed to go to this meeting, and I had the memo and I showed that person. I was welcome to come to this meeting, I just need to keep a low profile. So I think we need to be really careful what we say about what we're allowed to do and what we're not allowed to do, so that we are not
Yeah, you want to be giving
smirching
consistent
people who
messages.
do go or don't go for whatever reason.
You're in a really difficult position, all of you are, because a lot of that guidance came out just minutes before, a day before the actual meeting. And so you were left in this sort of ambiguous spot for a while before you knew what to say. So, for the events, if more than 2 of you show up, we are supposed to announce it as an official meeting, and that makes things complicated, administratively complicated. So one part of that guidance was just to say, if more than 2 of you will come, then let me know. My understanding is that an electronic gathering, it works the same way. But this is an electronic gathering where you already can be on. It's very transparent. So you can be listening. It's a public forum. And if that means just not signing in but looking, that's certainly fine. But you're also welcome to log in so that you can see the functions as they actually unfold. And that means watching the discussions in chronological order. It might be easier to actually digest the information there. I would recommend that you not post there, however, and not get involved in responding to those conversations. But observe and listen. And you're actually posted as listeners, because this site is set up to be as transparent as possible and getting all the different input in a place where everybody can see it, including all of you.
Your memo said you would prefer us not to go, but if you do go,
Yes.
don't talk.
It's a very polite way
Sorry.
of saying it. Yeah.
So you would still prefer us not to go, and you said that about the June 5th one, and you're saying that again to the July 19th one.
If you are going to go, or if you have interest in actually being in that conversation, that's to the pop-up booths or July 19th. My recommendation is to not show up as, have 2 or fewer of you and spread it out. Or if you're all going to go, we just need to announce the meeting so it's official. And I think that changes a little bit, Greg. I don't know all the ins and outs, but I think it means that it gets announced, the meeting begins, and then you...
It becomes a select board meeting as opposed to what we've talked about in the past of trying to make this meetings and forums about the firearms ordinance and get the input from the firearms ordinance and let people know that they're for the firearms ordinance as opposed to the select board meeting. And this will all come to a select board meeting, multiple of them. You'll get the information probably August, early September, and have at minimum one meeting about whether or not to change the ordinance and what it might look like, and then a public hearing if there are any changes on potential change to the ordinance. So there will be the formal public select board process, and at this point we're trying to do more the informal information gathering engagement piece with the public.
So, Jen, are you concerned that if one or more of us go, would that potentially impact the outcome of that particular forum? Would you think people would speak differently? Or what's your concern about that?
My concern for June 5th, and that would be different from my concern from July 19th, because the objective is different for that meeting, but my concern truly is that it would change the discourse that happens there. And that one of the things I was really looking for in June 5th, I know this conversation's been happening several times, and some of the same information comes up again and again. But this isn't necessarily a public comment period designed to reinforce those same arguments. It's designed to get you good input in order to make a good decision. So one thing I was worried about with June 5th is that rather than getting input, it would be really compelling to be trying to use that time to bend your ear to certain discussions or debates or points. And I don't know that that's the most effective use of time, given that there's only so many minutes of airspace in a public forum. Now, with a place like PlaySpeak, people can put all those comments and those lines of reasonings, and they can back them up in different ways, and it doesn't necessarily impinge on other people's minutes, because people will choose to put their time wherever they want. But in a public forum, when they're all sitting in that room waiting for their time to speak, it's not the best use of time for all the public. And my real concern was that it was going to change the quality of the input substantially if you were all there.
That's how I understood it, yeah. Okay. Any other questions? I saw Andy and I'll go to you, Irene.
So can we get back to my question? We got diverted to select board attendance. To
Your question was whether or not to
whether
engage
I
on
should be looking
PlaySpeak.
at any place other than this for whatever's been done, or is that it?
You should definitely check this out for whatever's been done, and you don't have to sign in order to do that. Anyone can look in the resources folders and look through them. If you're looking for the June 5th minutes, there's a folder called June 5th.
Yeah. Can you show me how to do that? Start from the beginning rather than
Yeah.
halfway down the page?
So, well, I'm trying to decide if we want to show them then. This way.
Well, yeah, I mean, you can do a quick tour of PlaySpeak, and while I have your ears and your time and your thinking, I have some other questions I'd like to ask you.
So if you were not signed up for PlaySpeak and not connected to this issue, this is what you will see. So if you were to go there on your tablet right now, you would see this is the issue. Here's who's been participating and what's happened. You would see a little bit of background, why we were consulting, who is listening. All the select board members are listed here just as the people who will be listening and making the decision.
Sorry, can I interrupt? Because when I go into it, this isn't what I see.
So have you signed up for an account on PlaySpeak? Okay.
So
When you go to PlaySpeak,
I don't even know how do I get here.
gotcha.
I forget how I got there. I must have clicked on some link that came to me.
What I would,
I clicked on the link that was in the,
yeah.
which you sent us, and it took me further in or somewhere else than what this is. So.
Maybe it took you to the PlaySpeak site.
And I'm just gonna navigate to that point. Firearms. So you go there from the town website here, and then go to PlaySpeak here.
So it's in the police department section, firearms discharge ordinance information. Just saying that out loud. So
I think
It's also
Darby
on-
is actually going to put it on the front page of both the town website and the village website.
It's underneath the notices section, or if people want to go straight there, it's www.essex.org/firearms.
So I'm going.
Slash that usually happens in internet addresses. I think it's backslash.
It's such a great question. I never know whether it's a backslash or forward slash.
Forward slash is the one that's been around since we were kids.
Okay, forward slash.
I'm trying to go to PlaySpeak right now, not being signed in. Sorry, this is taking a while. Let me go back and talk about once you are logged in and have connected to this, to find the resources and the materials from the public forum. So if you start on the overview page, you can see this generalized map of the areas that we're talking about and generally kind of where people are, but these dots are offset as you've probably heard. If you go to the resources tab, that's where all that information on that we've put out from the town is. So there's information about those self-guided visits. There's data on ballistics and firearms. There's zoning development maps, fish and wildlife, and then towards the bottom, materials from the June 5th public forum. So that includes stuff about how to participate in PlaySpeak. It includes some of the slides that we showed at that meeting. It includes a link to Channel 17's recording. So that's probably where you'd want to start if you want to go chronologically into this process. And then I'll also show the discussions. This is where a lot of those comments online may have been coming up. They're separated by topic. There's things such as questions about the range of sport shooting activities, honoring hunting legacy in Essex, also questions about the process and the procedures that we're going through. You can also see a map of people putting comments physically or geographically on the map. So you can zoom in and see, someone talked about this part of Essex. I think this is comments about turning the town dump into a shooting range as an example, and they're just putting those in geographic areas so you can see it a little more spatially. Let me see if the public-facing one is here. So if you were to try to find this, you know what that is?
I actually can't see it.
So the first thing you would want to do is sign up, because I don't think you can see much without signing up. Is that correct?
You can check the Vanity URL. I think anyone can actually see it without signing up and get all the information right there, whether you do anything. So it's playspeak.com/EssexVT Firearms. And it will bring you right to the topic homepage. If you forget that for whatever reason, I think Darby's putting quick links on the homepage of both the town and the village. And if all else failed and you Googled Essex, Vermont and PlaySpeak, probably you'd also come up, you'd find that topics page.
So without being signed in at all to PlaySpeak, you can see a little bit of what's going on, some of the discussions that are happening, but you cannot participate.
Now,
Sorry, this is the page that I've gotten to. I just went straight there from whatever link was sent to me.
So to sign in, sign up from here, you would just click on participate in this top.
So did you say I need to do that, or I can look at everything without doing that?
You can look at everything here, but the benefit to actually participating and logging in is that you'll see more of, you'll see it. This is sort of a straight view, and you'll find it easier to navigate once you're logged in.
So you recommend that we all get an account?
Yeah, I absolutely do.
Okay, all right, thank
Yep,
you.
when you're ready. I can only imagine that you probably get a lot of information about this issue, and trying to streamline it is both a trick and, my hunch is that if you sooner rather than later get used to what PlaySpeak can do, that you can also help folks who are struggling to figure out the interface. Because any new technology, any new email system, I always dread making those shifts. And this is not really any different than that. You have to participate and log in and find your way, spend a couple minutes there before it feels at all intuitive.
But having this write-up that you did send out on Front Porch Forum and so on should help us somewhat, I would hope.
I hope so, because I don't know how many. I'm somebody who doesn't really like to I don't like to post publicly online in very many things, and I always worry about putting my name out there. So if anybody was looking at PlaySpeak and was hesitant to sign up because they thought their name might automatically be connected to a post, that tutorial makes it very, very easy to figure out. You do need to sign in with your name, but then you can very easily be anonymous for the whole entire topic, and you only need to click those settings once for it to stay for the whole topic.
It's great that it's clear in that tutorial. For that.
Yeah, it's tough that it's not easier to see.
Yeah. And Jen has been working with folks who are having trouble. Town staff are available to help people if they're having trouble using and navigating the site. And towards the end of the public comment period, we will also have a pop-up at the Essex Free Library to get people signed on and participate if they haven't already, and do that in real time, as we'll have internet access to be able to do that.
Okay, that's great. Because when we kick this off with you, we were saying that we really need to have a place where folks feel comfortable posting their comments, and so I appreciate you getting this set up and then having the tutorial and make sure that people are at least a chance to be comfortable with it.
The invitation is genuine to come to a pop-up booth as well and just talk to us to figure out what those concerns are. Because it's not a forum, it's not a meeting. You can swing by. It'll be myself and another staffer at each pop-up booth.
And I think we got information about where those are going to be located, right, in here?
This week it's at Sand Hill, next week at the Farmers Market.
And That's out there on Front Porch Forum too, right? All right, terrific.
So I have a couple of questions. They're not long. So one question is from the June 5th forum itself. One of the participants was asked a really good question, which was, how is the survey going to be used? Because surveys always feel a little bit like votes. And I know how I intend for it to be used, but I do want to run it by you to see what you're thinking about it. Here's my sense about PlaySpeak, is that there's a survey up that where people can say what they're tolerant of for different options. I like this one, I don't like this one, etc. As with any poll, it will give you a good snapshot of what people's opinions are who participate, but not necessarily opinions of the whole entire town. I don't know if all of your constituents are going to be online or not. So there's two tools that we're hoping to present to you by the end of this public comment period. One is that survey, that snapshot of those who participated, what they're thinking about the different options. The other is a list of the different interests and perspectives that they're looking at. What are they paying attention to when they're trying to figure this out? What kind of criteria are they looking at? And a list so that you can just see what those different perspectives are. And that's topical. It's not necessarily going to be rated by popular choice or a vote, because my sense is that you're trying to weigh both those things. So that's my design for this. If you had different questions that you wanted asked, or a different plan in mind for how you wanted information, now would also be a good time to let me know, or any time between now and the next couple of weeks, so that we can design accordingly.
I guess we need more time walking through this, each of us, and then maybe come up with some additional questions that or comments that we'd like to forward probably to Evan, and he can get them out to you.
Yeah, or questions that you'd like folks to dial in a little bit more closely on if there's things that you're wondering. I would love to know what those impressions are, because ultimately by the end of this period, I really want you to have a comprehensive collection of information where you feel like you've done the best you can to get inside the minds of the many different people that you're trying to represent and make a decision for. And that's hard to do.
So yeah, I think we'll have better questions for you once we get a little bit more comfortable with that or experience with it. So what else do you have, Jen?
Yeah, these are quick. We have the ability on PlaySpeak to also invite non-resident feedback. So what that means is that you could open this up so that other folks who aren't from Essex could participate as well. In the data set, it will show that they're not from Essex, I believe. So you'll be able to look at those survey results or discussion results and see whether they're from Essex or not. Now, I know that there are some different efforts afoot to try to get opinion from folks who might use these spaces but not necessarily be from Essex. Do you want me to investigate what options we have for PlaySpeak for non-resident opinion?
What if they had an interesting idea that maybe the local folks didn't think of, but there's already a solution out there of compromise of some sort that maybe works well? Might be worth, I mean, my take is we could at least find a way to gather it and look at it and see if there's anything in there, but if there's not, then you don't use it, but there might be a gem in there.
I feel up differently.
Yep.
I feel like the PlaySpeak forum is a safe space for Essex residents to have their opinions placed without being diluted, interfered with, or changed in any way by people who are not part of Essex. However, it would be interesting. There may be some good ideas out there. There are other towns with this kind of zoning in it that might have this question. Perhaps if we have a disclaimer on the website that says, if you're going, PlaySpeak is for Essex residents. If you have an idea you'd like to share, please contact the manager. Please contact, send your ideas to, and then put an email address there.
You can have a discussion forum on PlaySpeak that is open to anyone, not just residents. It can be on this very same site, so everyone is still seeing it. But it just means in that option, that one discussion, that it's open to people who aren't just from Essex.
Is that made very clear? Because I could
What
see
it means
people
if
going
you're-
in there and not knowing.
It means if you're not an Essex resident, then you're going to try to click on some discussions and you'll say, I'm sorry, you have to be a resident in order to participate in this discussion. And they won't be able to participate. And it might be a little frustrating because there's a lot of options here that they won't be able to participate in. But it's an option if you are trying to streamline the process and be as transparent as possible about the feedback that you're receiving, because it all goes to one source without creating multiple documents.
So You're afraid it might intimidate conversation of locals, perhaps?
Possibly more the perception of it not being interfered with by outside people. You know, this is an Essex conversation, and while I understand there are non-Essex people that use the land to hunt on sometimes, feels like a local conversation to me.
What's the rest of the board? You want to keep it local or open it up? What's your thought? Irene?
I'm wondering if you could make that sort of the first question. Again, I haven't been in here either yet. But could it be, this is the forum for you if you don't live in Essex, and then all the other questions are, I mean, is there a way to make it primary so people don't have to go through 15 questions and be frustrated and give up before they get to
We can work on it.
We could just make that the first topic and say, if you're not an Essex resident, or if you are an Essex resident, you also see the rest.
And we can also change the titles of those discussions that say everyone, residents, residents, residents.
Andy?
I think I'd lean toward keeping it local. I'd be concerned that folks might get the impression that we're relying on outside opinion to make decisions, or that, you know, who knows who's going to go into that. I mean, we talked about, you mentioned California, we could have Russians in there, we could have, right?
Good. So keep it local?
I'm in favor of keeping it local, because I don't know if we're going to have that same geographic mapping thing that we have internally in this, you know, are they North Dakota, are they, you know, who is this? I don't, I'm not in favor of opening it.
Okay. Mike?
I would prefer to keep it local.
Okay. Irene?
Great. Yep.
Let's keep
Local it
local.
is, okay. I do encourage participation in PlaySpeak because again, it's transparent and it's one source. So if you don't want to be in that bind of trying to draw from different sources, and you find that you're getting information from other places, you can let us know. We can find other ways of making sure that it gets to this site. One participant said, if they write a letter or an email to the select board members, it would be really disheartening if that wasn't considered. One thing we can do is we're starting a folder for some of those so that people don't have to go through lots of different sets of minutes to find those communications. It won't show up in the data set that comes out of PlaySpeak because it's not as searchable as the discussions and the survey. But it is one place where those different voices and letters and opinions are going. So anyone who wanted to get educated on what that discussion was could find it. So I don't know if you're getting other communications in other ways, but the invitation is open, and throughout this process, if there's ways I can help streamline those things, please let me know.
One second. I see your hand, but I'm going to have the board finish discussions, and I'm going to open it up to the public, okay? So if you could just hang on there. Thank you. Andy?
So should we have a policy that where if we each individually get communications from somebody that we forward it, so there's a central repository of those, or do we, you know, so that it's, you know, if I get an email, I'm the only one that sees it unless I share it, but we don't, you know, it's not, I typically don't copy the entire select board on any kind of thing like that because I want to start a discussion, but do we, I think is that your question? That
No,
we
well, I think it's respectful to take each communication as it comes. I would never want to say how you and your constituents should be able to talk to each other, and people. There's ways of encouraging those communications to go into a shared forum or place. I'm just vested in making as many of options as possible as I can in a transparent way so that people can track the kinds of information you're getting.
Just to Jen's point, I mean, we're not telling you how to interact with your constituents, or the residents in town. Our thought, at least my thought, when we were talking about the select board folder was more if somebody sends a email or letter to the entire board, and it's something that's going to go in your
Something that's
meeting
already
file and
public.
packet, that
Yeah.
we can take that and also put it onto PlaySpeak.
Yep. Thanks for that.
The other thing you could certainly do, you get a personal email. You could say, do you mind if I share this with our moderator and our facilitator? And if they say yes, you do, and if they say no, please don't, you don't.
Or alternatively, I could send them the link to this site and encourage them to put their
Right.
comments there so that they're taken into account.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which is even better. So please, the
Right.
site first, and then my name is somebody who can help troubleshoot to get them to the site. Because I also can't post for any constituents to the site. I can't take information and put that data in there. So that's a pretty solid line, but I'm happy to work with people to make sure that they can access it.
And just a comment, we understand. One of the comments that came from the night and as others is, at least we're trying. And we're doing the best we can to get people to feel as comfortable as they can commenting. And that's the only thing we can do.
That was our goal.
So,
Okay. Other questions, or did you have any other questions for us?
No, I mean, please do all I can say is this feedback is the best. It's the vitamin that we have to make this better and more nutritive between now and the end of the comment period. So PlaySpeak is also an experiment. Our learning curve is swift. We're still learning and still feel clumsy about it sometimes. And I just hope that you see it as a pilot. You know, this is to see if it works. If it works for this, it can work for a lot of other different issues too. But, you know, please keep the feedback coming because there might be some adjustments we can make.
And if we do get the comments, we'll see if we can direct them to put them on this.
Yeah, if someone's willing to do that, absolutely.
So okay if we open up to the public at this point? Okay, are there questions or comments from the public? If so, just raise your hand and let me make sure I recognize you. I'm gonna call on Dan first and I'll come to you in the back.
Just to encourage, think about the gray areas. I have an immediate neighbor who is very much a resident of Essex and Essex Junction, and he used to work in Colchester. In fact, it's normal to work in a different community from where you live, and that can give you just as much of an interest in the discussion for where you work. I have another friend who used to live in Essex and now lives just over the border in Colchester. One more sort of gray potential participant.
Thank you, Dan. Okay, if you could state your name for the record, please.
Yeah, Tim Fayon. I live out in Brigham Hill Road. Couple of things I gathered tonight which kind of draw me a little bit of concern. First off, I want to applaud those of you who said that PlaySpeak needs to be local. Nobody else, no other town, none of that stuff. It's not their issue, it's our issue. You guys are elected by us, you work for us. That's what we hope you're doing. Well, that's what we know you're doing. As far as PlaySpeak goes, it's critical that you ask security questions to make sure that people aren't taking part in this that have no business being in it. It's too easy for people to sit there and anonymously throw their opinions out there because they're friends with somebody that's in the middle of this and heated about it and needs the backing, whatever their issues are. We can't allow that to happen, as we've seen with the world today. Too many people sneak around and in the shadows doing stuff like that, and this is a pretty important, and as you said earlier, a polarizing topic that it's scary for both sides of it for sure. One of the other things I wanted to mention is 2 select board members that received comments from people about hostility at the first forum and whatnot. Careful what you hear and who you listen to, because again, that's one side. I realize I was on being abused side. Obviously, I'm not easily intimidated, so it wasn't a big deal. But everybody in our conversation, and that was on the Brigham Hill Road northern section speak, was very cordial, and we listened to everybody except for one. And you all know who that person is, because it happens at every meeting that we have. So the point being is, if that person comes in and says they were intimidated, they were threatened, they were whatever, it couldn't be further from the truth. There was one other person in there that had some genuine concerns, and they were legitimate concerns when it comes to, touching off firearms in a closely populated area, whether you have good-sized chunk of land in your mind or not. I mean, you have to be respectful of your counterparts. But those of us that live on the outskirts where we do, and have the land that we do, we have a genuine concern, anxiety, if you will, that this is going to can go over the deep end fast, and it's important to keep it very specific, very controlled, if you will. I don't mind having people's input, but they better live in this town. Does the junction have are they part of this whole process? They have the right to speak on this whole process?
They're town residents,
do,
so
they're
yes.
town
Okay, so that's why I just wanted to make sure of that. So now we have a large body of people which shouldn't touch a firearm off anywhere in their vicinity. Again, dictating what we're going to do. I guess
But
this is all for a
here's what's
different
interesting.
forum.
Well, it's not. It's actually right to the point of play speak, and that the data can be separated a bit by geography. So
But when you say that,
Yeah.
when we're filling out our names and stuff, are you telling us are we having to tell where we're from in there when we sign in?
you put your name and your address.
Our physical mailing
Your
address.
yep.
And it's
It's
how is
a
that
street
confirmed?
address.
Or is it? I mean, how is it?
Yeah. So
I guess if one person signs in, you're not going to forge your name again to give her 2 votes or whatever.
Well, PlaySpeak, you'll have to read. You can do a little bit of research. PlaySpeak has some tutorials where they talk about what that process is, and it's a little bit beyond my pay grade in terms of figuring out what those geo-verification structures are. But they cross-reference various public bits of information to try to do their best they can to locate that person and address. So if you were from across the country trying to put in an address here, it would be caught up in their filters. That's already happened once, and it was totally legit. That person belongs in the conversation, just happened to be in a completely other location. And it becomes a point of contact between PlaySpeak, who reaches out to that person to say, are you really legit? Give us some more information to show us that you're from that address. So yes, and that information might still look anonymous when you read the site, because you then have the option to post anonymously.
I'm good with anonymous. They can
Yeah.
be as anonymous as they
Yeah.
want. I just want to make sure that those who are facilitating
get it.
are assuring that they are us
Yeah.
and not somebody
You'll
else.
also know that there's some comments that have been pulled from the forum for folks who weren't quite following that policy. Either they didn't sign up with enough verification, and so for a moment their privileges are suspended until they do.
Mhm.
So you may see some moderated comments. Those aren't. I'm not actually pulling that because I'm not privy to the
Right.
information people are putting in, but PlaySpeak is.
But you had mentioned
Yes.
could be multiple questions asked in order to confirm that. I asked that maybe you think about that and actually do that. The more, I mean, the security we have to do things nowadays, why should this not be as important as anything else? And real quick, I was just I don't think this is a place to go over this right now, so we'll discuss it at a different time, but I appreciate everybody's help on it and what you're doing, and I appreciate you guys trying to limit it to just us.
Thank you for your comments.
Thank you.
Greatly appreciate it. Anybody else? Jeff?
Jeff Kirshner. I also live on Brigham Hill Road. I want to just tag on to what Tim said a little bit. I was in the subgroup for the Blues, where we are, where we were giving the facilitator our input in a very respectful manner. What are the pros and cons of the various options we were presented? And right off the bat, that became abusive by one lady calling somebody an idiot. And for a second there, it got really ugly. And cooler heads prevailed. And obviously that woman was in favor of some changes. But in speaking with her, we kind of talked through, what's your concern? What's going on? And by the time that was done, after a few minutes, while we may not always agree with her, most of that room was very sympathetic with that woman. She was undergoing some problems that she had during hunting seasons where people were not abiding by her posted signs. They were blocking driveways. They were just being plain disrespectful. And there's already ordinances and regulations in place to handle what this woman's concern was. It had nothing to do with the firearms ordinance or more ordinance or changes. we already have policies in there to address her concerns. So while we don't necessarily agree with her, we were all sympathetic with her. I'd be a little upset too if people were blocking my driveway during deer season. If people were trespassing on my property, I'd be upset too. Totally different conversation from what we were there to talk about that night. So it was an interesting dynamic back and forth. That I think in the end we calmed her down a little bit. She didn't necessarily change her opinion, but I think she had a lot more support in concept and sympathy from the guys in that room. So that's something that doesn't come out of PlaySpeak and reading an email or a post on a forum. I know sometimes reading an email, you don't get any tone out of that email. I can read you something 2 or 3 different ways and you can interpret it different. By just the way that I announce it, where I pause in that sentence. I hear what Jennifer is saying, where you guys don't necessarily want to be at those, but I wish you guys were in that room that I was in when that woman called us idiots. Because I think it was a very good conversation at the end that you would never get in this PlaySpeak arena. I don't know what to say about that other than I would encourage you to go and see the dynamic. You guys know it's very polarizing, but there are some extremes, I think, but there's good conversation in the middle that is worthwhile to hear. And the final thing I wanted to say is, nobody's talked about it here tonight, but slipped in your packet tonight was input from the Department of Fish and Wildlife, which at that June 5th forum was just brushed over. I don't think that data was available yet. It kind of came in right at the last minute. Well, it's here. And there's a pretty good statement from Fish and Wildlife that says, hey, we got to pay attention here to wildlife management. And hunting is a huge tool to manage the deer population and the deer harvesting. If we have to, I love these little critters. I've loved them since I was a little kid. They're beautiful, but they're pests. They can be a pest. I have trees that are just from 6 feet down, have nothing on them because the deer just go and annihilate them. If we don't control the deer herd, we're going to have deer starving because we have too many deer than the habitat can support. We're going to have deer dying. We're going to have damage to properties. These things are going to come in and they're going to start eating people's gardens and their trees and damage the forests. We're going to have trouble with ticks. Ticks are obviously a problem now. Deer are a carrier of ticks. That's another management tool for those. And the last thing is accidents. We're gonna be Pennsylvania, where there's deer running all over the roads and we're bouncing off them with cars in the evening. I know I have to be careful going home when the sun goes down, driving down Old Stage, Brigham Hill Road, because at any moment they run across in front of you. So it's just something. It wasn't part of the forum. I wanted to bring highlight to it.
It's in our packet. We read that.
Because it wasn't there, and I was looking for that feedback from that initial segment, and we didn't get it.
Okay.
So anyway, I wasn't going to talk about that forum, but I thought it was interesting to share because I was like Tim. I was on the receiving end that I didn't think I was going to be on, and by the time we got all done, I felt for that woman a little bit. I still don't think we should make changes, but I was sympathetic with her. So.
Sorry that you had to endure name calling, but I'm glad that it was limited to that one incident. But you're right, the face-to-face there's nothing that could really replace that. But knowing that some people aren't comfortable doing that,
sure.
We had to have another tool to do it. Not as good as face-to-face, definitely, Jeff.
I think it's great that you're doing it and you are getting a lot of feedback, and that's good. You get it. So I'll read you that sentence, and I can change some of that discussion in just how
I don't think
how
there's
I
any argument with that. So, thank you for your input.
Thank you for listening.
Anybody else would like to comment on the firearms discussion? Okay, we'll bring it back. Any last questions for Jen before we end? The next event is July 19th, and you're saying that you would recommend the select board go or not go to this one? I was not sure what you said.
I don't think I'd make a recommendation right now, but I think it might make sense to look at those objectives once they get framed out in the agenda And if we have a guidance for you that's different from what we've already given, then we'll specify.
Okay, very good.
Fair enough?
Okay. Yeah. So thank you for working with us on this really important issue and bringing the community together so that we can have a real conversation and end up in a place that, you know, can make Essex a better place if changes are needed. So, thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, we're gonna move on to our second to last item of business, which is appointment of select board members to subcommittee for governance. And Greg, did you wanna kick that off for us, or what?
Yes, so this is a follow-up from your June 14th meeting last Thursday. In terms of moving forward and looking at different governance options, timelines, no problem. To refresh you, so we've all talked about, or the boards have both talked about having one community, one government, equal representation, stuff like that. The kind of unanswered questions of how to get there and when to get there. At the meeting on the 14th, the boards decided to put together a subcommittee to study some of those issues. So actually kind of looking at two things for tonight. One is to appoint 2 members to serve on a subcommittee for governance, but before you get there, to speak a little bit about what the goals and the tasks of that subcommittee might be in terms of coming up with different options for governance structure, when it might take place, how to do it, what's legal, what might be best accepted by the town, trying to answer some of those questions, or at least present some options to the rest of the boards. I think it might make sense to at least have some general feedback and some general ideas for the October joint meeting, if the subcommittee is ready to do that. But that, kind of looking at that as a target option to start to push this forward a little bit more. But with that, I'll turn it over to you in terms of what you want to see out of it.
Okay, so why don't let's break this up into 2 pieces before we talk about who we want to appoint or who's willing to be appointed to it. Let's make sure we understand what the objective really should be for the subcommittee. Greg outlined a number of things. For example, researching options for types of governance structure, prioritizing equal representation. Should any change that we're proposing happen all at once, or is there a certain phase-in kind of thing we'd want to do? What charter changes might be necessary to accommodate these things? What type of surveys or public outreach do we want to do, along the way to validate, our work? We need to take into account the Essex Governance Group input on the voting piece, and even on, I think, neighborhood assemblies or whatever, that will, what they had recommended. And then come up with, perhaps different options and the pros and cons of each, and then maybe October, that joint meeting in October, give a readout as to where we are. It's a lot. That is a busy subcommittee. So just want to make sure that everyone's eyes are wide open before we get committed. So, Greg?
So October would be great. I didn't expect, or when I was saying that, I wouldn't expect all the questions to be answered and presented and fleshed
We need
out.
a
by
readout,
October,
though, at
but
least, right?
have some thoughts on paper. Yeah.
Okay. So as far as mission, is that about what you were expecting this subcommittee to do, or what are your thoughts? Anybody? Andy?
I didn't realize that this subcommittee would be involved in gathering the public input as well. I thought that this was more a what are the options discussion. What are the legal options, I guess, is maybe the way to say that, or what.
Yeah, I wasn't proposing that they do the outreach, but just, at what points in the process would it make sense to do outreach or a survey along the way?
Or it may not be what you think this committee should do, and you leave it to another committee or someone
Sure.
else.
Yeah.
I think the committee could have plenty to tackle without public outreach being on the topic menu.
Mike?
I don't know if I'm going to say this right, but I'm going to give it a go. This to me is a fairly simple subject. And by that I mean it's how we're going to rearrange the governing body as we move forward. I don't know that we would need public input for that right out of the gate. I think it kind of goes back to a couple of other topics that we've had where we're going to be asked questions that we don't know the answers to if we do that too soon in the process. We're going to be asked questions that we don't have answers to give them. And to my way of thinking, I think we should talk about certainly the goals and objectives of the subcommittee. No, absolutely no question. But I'm not sure that a public input piece would be, that I would feel strongly about doing that early in the process. I think, quite frankly, I think the public is looking to us to come to them with ideas on how we change this and how we effectively govern this community.
Yeah, maybe I was not clear. What I was saying is the subcommittee could decide when it would be appropriate as we're moving forward with this, at what time would we want to go forward? Not saying that we'd want to do that right away or anything, but maybe thinking about it and saying this might be an appropriate place because we have these questions that we need because we're coming to a Y in the road or something, and we'd like to get feedback on what direction.
One of the purposes of our decision to do this as a subcommittee was to alleviate the staff of some heavy lifting in terms of research. And I see this subcommittee being charged with investigating the questions, going out and finding the expertise to help us answer questions and find out what we're allowed to do, what we're not allowed to do, what there may be multiple options, there may realistically only be one option. I see this group as primarily answering questions from the boards and staff about how to move forward. And so consulting with the Secretary of State's office, consulting with the League of Cities and Towns, gathering that kind of information, and then sharing it with the boards and the staff to say, here's what we learned, now what would you like to do? I think if we bite it off in small pieces, it'll be more manageable, because all of those things that were mentioned that this committee could conceivably achieve, it is a lot. So let's be slow, let's be thorough, and answer the questions. We all have tons of questions. Let's ask those questions and get the answers first before we do anything else.
Okay, so solicit both boards for those questions.
Right.
Have them go into the subcommittee's to-do list and prioritize them, and then go try to answer those
Have the
questions.
subcommittee answer the questions, do the
So
research.
that that's
yeah.
not being put on staff.
Right.
Okay.
And I think that responsibility rightly rests with these boards. We're the ones pushing for this change, and so we need to go find the answers to what we're asking for.
Is that kind of the sense of the board for that? And I think when we have two from the select board and two from the village get together, then I think they'd have to fine tune exactly, what it is. But at least from the select board side, is that in agreement with what you were thinking for the subcommittee to as a first step anyway, to get the questions from the members and then try to go out and get those answers, whether they're legal or procedural or whatever, from VLCT or the Secretary of State or whatever the appropriate authority body is. Is that about right, Mike?
Yeah, I think that sums
Okay.
it up for me.
Okay.
Yep.
Andy?
Works for me if it needs to be a subcommittee doing it, yes.
Okay. Yes, we know your position on subcommittees. Irene, how about you?
Yeah, I'm just concerned once again that the outside the village folks have enough voice.
I'm
So
sorry,
that-
say that again, please.
I'm concerned that folks from outside the village have enough input into this conversation, because they don't have a board like the trustees do. And if the select board appoints folks who live in the village, we're looking at another committee set up, as so many committees have been set up in recent years, that has an imbalance according to the origins of people's residency.
Elaine?
So, as we just established, as I think we've established, that this is going to be a subcommittee of board members, so therefore the entire town will have a voice because we represent the entire town. However, that said, I guess we're already moving into the second part of the question, which is who represents what. And I think all of us know very well that we can't have this conversation without geography being considered because you won't have it any other way. So I know that that's where we're going, and so we might as well start that conversation.
Andy, you have your hand up?
This part of the process where we're answering questions, I'm not sure has geographical relevance. I think, the question of what's legal to do, what are the options should apply to whomever asks them. I guess it's just to like, once again rebut the concern that there's a feeling that I haven't represented the town adequately. So I think this part of the process, we're asking this subcommittee to go look for answers to specific questions. Location of your physical residence within the town is not relevant, I don't believe.
For this first step, but.
For this first step,
I think
right.
there's gonna be subsequent steps where.
So my proposal would be that be a different subcommittee then, if we have to do it in a subcommittee format. Because then it may not have the representation that is being asked for by some folks. I don't think this step needs to have that representation factor taken into account.
As long as we have a new appointment for the next steps.
So if right, maybe you have to have a subcommittee that talks about representation, then you have to have a subcommittee, because, you're asking, this is a 2-year process right here. The things that you laid out right here as possible things for the subcommittee to do, sounds like, it's at best a November of next year vote, right? November of 2020. And so this is a long-term commitment you're asking for folks to make tonight if we're only going to establish one subcommittee to do this. It's one of the reasons why I think the whole select board should do it, so that, because we're whole select board and trustees, since we're all, assuming some of us get reelected in the coming elections, will be in for that whole term.
So would you propose that no subcommittee be formed at this step for this process to answer the questions?
No, what I'm proposing is that we could certainly have a subcommittee at this point, but I think representation within that subcommittee, the location that, the physical location where the subcommittee members live is not relevant to answering the question about what's legal to do from a municipal governance standpoint.
I thought I heard you say the whole select board should answer the questions, that's what I.
No, the entire list. If you're looking at this entire list that you laid out before, I would prefer to have the entirety of both boards be fully engaged in all those discussions, so that we're all bought in, so that we don't, I mean, we've had committees before where committees come back, they make recommendations, and they never happen because they don't, the whole board isn't in on it, is not, that's the wrong phrase, that they're not, they haven't bought into it. Whereas if everybody's in the room together, you're making the decisions together, you make the votes as you go, or you make decisions as you go. Whereas if you have a subcommittee that takes, a long time to develop the content that is from the full list, there's a significant potential that the entirety of either board may not buy into it. And so I think if we're limiting the scope of this initial subcommittee to answering questions, the representation component is not necessarily relevant.
Elaine?
I agree with you, Andy, on that where we live has no bearing on this conversation right now. However, in the interest of moving forward and making sure that we are making progress on this question that our residents want us to make progress on, I would rather appoint folks in a way that makes the entire board satisfied, because we know from experience that if we are not entirely satisfied with the process will be attacked until it falls apart. So my recommendation would be that we do the best we can with what we have, and we assemble a subcommittee that is satisfactory to the majority of the board.
Mike? What are your thoughts?
I agree with Andy. I really don't think that the makeup of the subcommittee at this particular juncture has anything to do. I mean, if I live in the village and I am going to volunteer to be a select board representative to this subcommittee, which I would like to do, I don't see the fact that I live here in the village but am going to be representing the board. I don't see that as a negative. I have to agree with Andy. I really don't think that I have not represented Essex in its entirety for the 6 years that I've been on the board. I think it's been all about Essex. I don't care what your address is. It's all about what's good for Essex. So for me, I'm going to volunteer to be on this. You guys can decide whether the fact that I live in the village is going to be a detriment to that or not.
And do you think?
I don't think it is, or else I wouldn't be standing up.
How would we know when we get to a point where maybe that makes a difference, do you think?
To be honest with you, Max, I really don't see that being an issue until we have something in place. Because then you're gonna have a series of elections. You can't go in and just dynamite two different boards because you've decided that you're gonna have 5 from each community, and you don't have that right now. So you can't dynamite the boards because you're just gonna lose a lot. So I guess the way I'm thinking is you're gonna feather that out by elections. So I really don't see that being a real issue until we get to a point where we're coming to, where the subcommittee is coming to the boards with a recommendation of how we do this.
As far as answer the questions, you see it's okay.
I do.
All right. Elaine?
I agree with Mike. I mean, the initial purpose of this subcommittee is information gathering. And there's going to be quite a bit of that. And there's going to be lots of discussion about potential models. And then once those models are presented, perhaps that's the time we reconstitute, or we move on to a new phase where we talk about representation, or we talk about taxation, or whatever the next topic is. But initially, it's information gathering. It doesn't have a home.
I'm hearing from my peers on the board that they feel they adequately represent the entire town, and I've never said otherwise. In fact, our charge is to represent the entire town. What we've heard from residents from the town outside the village for 6 or 8 months now is that they don't feel adequately represented because they have no board comparable to the trustees that keep their interests in mind. They would on their behalf because we don't see things the way they do. We represent the entire town, or as a trustee, we represent the village, but they themselves represent outside the village interest only, and if we're not going to admit people like that onto our committee, I think it will be problematic.
Elaine?
I'm just going to say again, this is information gathering. I don't see, this is for the 2 boards to do, and we're going to gather information from expertise, from expert resources, and bring it through to the boards uninterpreted. Just questions are being answered, and information will be provided. I don't see how the fact that Mike is a village resident will change the answer that the Secretary of State gives him when he asks a question. It just seems pretty simple to me.
Due to work commitments and personal commitments, I have 5 days in the month of July that I would be available to participate in this. I work a full-time job. It's not clear to me that I can arbitrarily take time off to go spend a couple hours in the Secretary of State's office, either, traveling down there and spending time in there. So if this work needs to happen by October, I would be very challenged to engage prior to sometime in August. So, this is essentially a volunteer job we're doing here. Maybe day after tomorrow I'll have more free time on my hands. I don't know, but I just can't commit to this. There's as I said, I've got 5 days, and I'm sorry, I'm not going to sacrifice one of them for this.
Okay. So we talked about what we think the subcommittee would do, and that's to answer the questions. We've had discussions about, does it matter where you live or not? If we can get the answers, get the answers to our questions and have it balanced, then it'll be a win-win, right, for everybody, wouldn't it? If we do that. And I would say that after, each phase, like if we get all these questions answered, which my guess is that's gonna be a continuously filling bucket of questions. But we may say, okay, now maybe it's time for somebody else to step in, because it may be, arduous for this 4 people to burden that. But I think it's important that we don't dump it on staff, because they got way more than on their plates than they don't need this either. Mike?
I think, with respect, I think you run the risk where if you reconstitute the board, or you have somebody come in.
The subcommittee?
Yep.
Yeah.
If you have somebody come in and start, and then all of a sudden you arbitrarily pick a spot where, okay, now we have to change the makeup, you're gonna lose an awful lot of time and an awful lot of institutional knowledge that has built up over that first step, trying to bring somebody else in to acclimate them on where you've been already. I see that as a colossal waste of time, with respect.
Okay. I mean, I think if we can go back to joint meetings every other month and not every month, I would be willing to step forward and try to go get the answers to questions. I'm 2 houses away from the village border, but if that makes peace, I'd like to see us move forward in a cohesive way, together. I think it's important that we have a good working relationship. And if that's what it takes for me to step forward and say I would put in this extra work, then I would be willing to do that. It's important. I'm busy too, but my hours are more flexible because of who my employer is.
And mine are as well, which is why if I didn't think I had the time to put into this, I wouldn't.
Thank you, Mike. Appreciate that.
I don't know that you're gonna get all 5 people over the moon about whatever decision gets made here tonight.
I know, that's true. Yeah. So what I'm saying is I'd be willing to toss my hat into the ring, and I don't think I would have to do too much arm twisting on Irene. Is that true? Would you like to? Okay. So you'd like to be on there too? Is that right?
I'd be willing to.
Okay.
Make time for this.
Okay. And Andy, go ahead.
To be clear, I'm thrilled to pieces on the subject matter. I would love to be on this committee, but I just do not have I just can't.
And I respect that. I understand.
Put the time into it.
You have a different employer than I do. And
my wife would let me go back to school. I would go to law school.
It's never too late.
Maybe on Wednesday. Yeah.
So would that be okay if Irene and I did it? We're just gonna, we can always review it again. After this phase, because this phase is really just data gathering, and we're gonna just share with everybody. Everybody have the same level of knowledge. at that point. And if we want to do something different at that time, as I probably say ad nauseum, we can check and adjust, if that's okay. And if, Mike, you look like you're not happy.
No, you already know my opinion. I'm not gonna state it again.
Okay, all right. So, what's the board's pleasure?
I'll move that Max and Irene are appointed to the subcommittee on governance.
Second.
Okay, thank you, Elaine. And Mike, any further discussion on that? Appointing Irene and myself? Andy?
I'm saddened that we have to resort to the physical location of where the participants live in order to make the decision.
Amen, brother.
Yeah.
Agreed.
I have to agree in this particular case, I don't see it's important. But it is to some, and I'm looking to try to get us to be together as a whole organization, to do the business of the people that we know needs to be done in a way that we can be proud of, the outcome. So, okay, any other discussion? Okay, all those in favor of appointing Irene and me to the governance subcommittee signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, motion passes unanimously. Thank you for that discussion, all. We're gonna go on to the next item, which is approval of the minutes of June 4th, 2018, with select board corrections. Do I have a motion?
I would move that we approve the select board minutes of June 4th, 2018, no matter how late it is, with select board member corrections.
Okay, thank you. Irene, do I have any comments on page 1?
Do we have a second?
Wait, hold
Oh,
on,
sorry.
slow down, let me get there.
Yep.
So, thank you, Andy. Yes, do I have a second on Irene's motion?
Second.
Okay. Is everybody there?
No.
Okay, let me know. Ready? Okay. Comments on page 1. Irene?
So on lines 34 to 35, do you have these, Greg? I left them for Sam.
Yes, I have
Thank you.
Sam's.
Okay. So on 35, the second word, due to transparency needs for the public to be educated on an issue, seems to me like a misplaced modifier to minutes, so I'd just like to move that phrase earlier in the sentence. So that would read, Mr. Andy Slentup was in favor of transparency and needs for the public to be educated on an issue and was opposed to blah, blah, blah.
Are you okay with that? Doesn't change the content. Okay. Anything else on 1? Page 2? Page 3? Mike, you have something?
Well, I've got something, I can't find it on this bloody machine. And I should have been smart enough to write the line number down, and I didn't. No.
Okay. All right, page 4. Page 5. I have a correction on line 206, where it says, Mr. Let's confirm for Mr. Levy that the developer wants to implement this project regardless of development. So I believe it's Mr. Let's confirm for Ms. Levy that the town wants to implement this road project regardless of development. Okay? Everybody good?
Good, thank you.
Okay. Okay. Anything else on 5?
I found it.
Okay. On 4, on 3?
No, I found it on 5, actually.
Oh, on 5, okay.
Excellent.
Perfect timing,
Right
Mike.
where we are.
What's your correction?
It saves Evan from having to negate it because we're going backwards instead of forwards, so. Line 237. It reads, about midway through, Mr. Plegman was confused about the logic of moving money around. I don't believe that was the thought at all. I believe what I said was that I couldn't ever recall us reducing awards simply because they were the first time in, I believe.
So what wording would you like?
Well, therein lies the rub. So I would say Mr. Plegman could not recall ever having made funding decisions based on an entity's entry into the pool.
Carry that last part, Mike? Funding decisions.
First time entry.
Based on their first-time entry into the pool.
Okay. Anything else on 5? We'll go to 6. And Irene?
I'm just gonna mention this, Greg, I didn't mark that on my sheet, cause I just wanted to throw it out for, go ahead. Absolutely.
Sorry.
Basically, you can save the Mr. Plegman, Greg, and get rid of the rest, and then just,
Caught up, I'm good. All right, thanks.
Irene?
In lines 262, 263, the corrections are just out of order, and that struck me as odd, but I'm fine with leaving it. I just wanted to point out that I noticed it. See how like line 124 is after line 128, blah, blah. I'm just mentioning it. Don't need to change it as long as it doesn't bother you. I can live with it.
Anything else on
But I did see it.
on 6?
Note that it was seen.
Good.
Huh?
We should note that it was seen.
Page 7? Andy?
This has to do with actually 337 and 338, but those aren't the lines that need to be changed. Our conflict of interest policy requires that conflicts of interest be disclosed in open meeting. And while we were in executive session, a select board member recused themselves from a portion of the meeting, and there was no public disclosure of the conflict that led to that. So there's a recused vote. And so I'm asking whether we should, whether the select board member that recused himself should add a comment in here about that recusal.
Yeah, I didn't make one.
No, that's accurate. That's accurate. You're supposed to explain why you're recusing yourself
Before you recuse yourself.
before you do it.
Right, but we don't want to put things in the minutes that
What
didn't really
line?
happen.
what line number are we on?
Well, it's
doesn't- it's not
it's
there.
line 337, 338. There was a vote that passed 4-0, and there's no comment about
Oh, I got it.
recusal, no
Okay.
disclosure of conflict of interest. So,
Yeah, it just says 334 I left.
Right, perhaps if we said something like on 334, left executive session at 10:01 PM due to a conflict of interest, or an explanation of suitable nature, and then that would explain the 4-0 vote in the following line.
Well, doesn't
Say to avoid.
334 explain it? Irene Renner left executive session at 10:01.
But it
Well,
doesn't
the-
explain why.
that's not the issue. The issue is that there's no public disclosure of the conflict of interest that led to that recusal.
Exactly.
I can say to avoid conflict of interest. Do you want to say that?
Okay.
Because I
I-
didn't
I-
state it.
No, you did not. I'm just saying that there's a violation of our policy here, and I just want to make sure, I want
Yep.
to should, sometimes when there are incorrect facts in here, we will correct those too, but, so I'm just wondering whether we should somehow identify, for.
The conflict.
For future, what the conflict is. It's our policy that you have to publicly disclose conflicts of interest in open meeting. I mean, I've done this before where I've recused myself from executive session discussions, and I did it prior to the start of the executive session. And I didn't see it happen, so.
The reason for going into executive session is a public document.
Self-evident. It was like,
So,
I didn't
so
think
wait,
it was-
wait. So the conflict should be noted what it is. It is, if you don't mind,
Go for it.
it is a complaint filed by Ms. Renner for a public records request. Therefore, Ms. Renner should not have been in that session and recused herself. So I think the minutes should reflect just that, and we could put that in there. I agree.
That's
that
what I
that's
think
the
should go in there,
conflict,
yes.
and it should be, and maybe our minutes taker was trying to be very
Well, it was never
mindful.
said, it was never.
Right,
But
it was
even if
never
it
said.
wasn't
She's
said,
not-
it's self-evident,
And she's not
then it
in
can be
executive
added.
session either. So, we will add that to these lines
Appreciate it.
Thank you,
and eliminate that conflict.
thank you.
Well, at least
Thank you.
identify a couple. Okay, anything else on 7? And page 8? Oh, sorry.
Line
Elaine?
340,
340.
Everyone's name is spelled wrong.
Oh, yeah. Render.
On page 340? Oh, yes. Let's fix that. You see that, Greg?
Yes.
Okay. Now, anything else on 8? Hearing none. All those in favor of the June 4th, 2018 Select Board minutes with corrections signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, motion passes unanimously, 5-0. We're on to consent agenda. Can I have a motion for that? Approving consent?
I would, go ahead.
I'll move we approve the consent agenda.
Thank you, Elaine. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Irene. Any further discussion on consent items, which are really check warrants of June 8th and 15th? Okay. Irene?
May I just ask about the seed building at the tree farm? At one point, we were told we couldn't.
That's the reading
That's
file.
the reading file.
Oh, sorry. Wait,
Okay.
I can wait.
Any comments on the check warrants of either June 8th or the 15th? Hearing none? Okay. All those in favor of the consent agenda signify by saying aye.
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 Okay, that passes 5-0. On to the reading file. Comments on that? Irene, something about the seed building.
Way back when we got the tree farm, I felt there were conditions on what we could and couldn't destroy. So has that been mitigated with the state who awarded us, who sold us the property and said, don't touch anything?
The state has been consulted on the seedling building, and they have said it's okay to take it down.
Yep.
That note was actually in our packet, right?
Yeah.
It was.
I think,
Just saying it for the public.
I think they came to the same understanding we had, that that building needs to come down.
It's a goner.
It's,
Yeah.
Thank you.
Elaine, you had your hand up. Did you want to comment on that?
I was going to remark that the State Historic Preservation Officer approved it, and it's in the packet.
Yeah, they weren't happy, but they recognized that it has to be done. Okay, any? Yes.
While not in the reading file, there's been some staff back and forth on what we affectionately call the Super Sucker 5000 machine and the grant. It really just sucks things out of catch basins and other things, so it's a whole lot easier to just call it that, and it's catchy.
Fun to say, even, right?
The village has applied for a grant to replace their machine that the town does use from time to time, actually very often, and there's a issue with Buy America and getting a waiver for the machine. So there's back and forth. So just a FYI, there's a belief that we may at some point have to just delay the grant or turn back the grant. We're hoping not to have to do that. It is about $300,000, and I'm sure any day now the relations between the United States and Canada will resume. But we do need to get a waiver. So
For the Canadian steel.
there are two vendors, and both of them need to go get a waiver from the federal government to be able
Red
to
tape,
comply.
right there. Okay.
So if anybody from the federal government's listening, really could use a waiver.
Good luck with that. Okay, any other comments on the reading file? Okay, we do not need executive session because we made our appointments in public, right?
We adjourn.
Okay, do I have a second on adjourning?
Second.
Thank you, Elaine. All those in favor of adjourning signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, we're done. So, we're just a reminder, July 9th is our next regular